Chapter 1406. Noah had no idea what was happening outside. Because Noah didn't expect that his experiment would cause such a big commotion. Yes. Experiment. All of this was just Noah's experiment. The object of the experiment was the sovereignty of the sun obtained in the last world. In the last world, Noah mainly got two gains. One was to fight with all kinds of legendary existences, which made his ability value gain a lot of experience points. Not only was it upgraded to LV5, but it also upgraded the all-around value to stage No. The all-around value was upgraded to stage A. That was before Galgi disguised as the black-robed man to test Noah. After that, Noah experienced a series of battles with Galgi, Maxwell, Letitia, and a series of legendary figures such as the final trial of mankind, and gained a lot of experience points. After waking up this morning, Noah's ability value was updated, and his ability value was once again improved. Noah Doria LV 5 Strength, A, 865, SSS, 1840, Durability, A, 877, SSS, 1847, Dexterity, A, 880, SSS, 1856, Agility, A, 888, SSS, 1866, Magic, A, 866, SSS, 1859, Mystery, FD Magic, FD Swordsman, FD Shatter, ID Magic, Weapon Refining, Steel Making Magic. Duplicate, refine, and forge weapons. Duplicate, refine, and forge weapons will be weakened to a certain extent according to the level, performance, and ability of the weapon. Duplicate, refine, and forge weapons will be maintained for a long time according to the level, performance, and ability of the weapon. Swords Protection, Permanent Magic. Permanent protection will be obtained according to the attributes of the Contract Spirit. Contract Spirit as a Sword Spirit, obtain the protection of the Sword Spirit, and weaken physical attacks on oneself. The degree of weakening will increase or decrease according to the strength and ability of the target. Cold Smelting, Quick Attack Magic. Gradually turn the target into steel. Successful tempering will crush it. The tempering speed is determined according to the strength and ability of the target. Skills, Protection from the World, it was a permanent skill. Equal to luck. Events that were directly related to luck would eventually lead to the most favorable outcome. The overall increase in proficiency had increased by nearly 5,000 points. This level of improvement was simply appalling. To be able to have such an improvement after reaching LV5. That was really quite amazing. After all, the higher the level, the harder it would be to increase the proficiency. Although this was something that had yet to be proven, almost everyone could feel that once they leveled up, it would become very difficult to increase the proficiency. Including Noah. Therefore, even Noah was pleasantly surprised by this improvement. However, when he thought about the level of existences he had fought in the past few battles, this level of improvement was not surprising. Moreover, in terms of development abilities, Noah's abilities were all upgraded to D stage. Especially the development ability of fragmentation, it leaped all the way, directly skipping 5 stages and catching up with the development ability of mystic, magician, and swordsman. That was natural. The improvement of development ability was the same as the basic ability, it had to go through the path of gaining experience. If you want to improve magician, you have to use magic and magic often. If you want to improve swordsman, you have to use sword skills and sword-type weapons often. And if you want to improve fragmentation, you naturally have to use powerful skills that can cause destruction often. Almost every battle Noah fought would cause unimaginable destruction. It was natural that he would directly upgrade so many stages. In this way, the comprehensive improvement of the ability value allowed Noah's strength to take another small step forward. In addition, he also leveled up in the box, causing the use of the 2 avatars to no longer be a burden, proving that Noah's choice to enter a world with a higher degree of power, which was the world of the box, was not wrong. Another gain was the sovereignty of the sun and simulated star map, another cosmology. Not to mention the sovereignty of the sun, the simulated star map, another cosmology, was already a huge gain. After all, with the illusory star Tai Sui, the two strongest species in the box would no longer be a threat. Although there was a limit to who he could use it on, the ability was indeed against the rules, so the gain was not small. As for the sovereignty of the sun, it could be strengthened correspondingly with the inheritance. The sovereignty of the sun of the Leo constellation could strengthen the defense, allowing the person to be immune to all the attacks of the sharp blade-type weapons. The sovereignty of the sun of the dragon could strengthen the spiritual lattice, greatly increasing the spiritual lattice of the person. In Noah's body, it was a large increase in magic, divine power, and divine power. It could even strengthen the spirit with some special techniques. It was precisely because of the strengthening of the spirit of the dragon's sovereignty that Noah could use the two avatars without any burden, which could be said to be of great help. However, in normal times, when Noah did not need to use the two avatars, the strengthening of the dragon's sovereignty of the sun became dispensable. No matter what, Noah's magic, divine power, and divine power were all endless, so there was no need to increase them. That was why Noah thought of it. Since the energy was unlimited and there was no need to increase it, then, using the dragon's sovereignty of the sun to increase the limited output, would it work? As soon as he thought of it, Noah immediately put it into action and began the experiment. As a result, the experiment was a success. After increasing the output, the terrifying divine power that ordinary people could not imagine surged out of Noah's body, instantly causing all the clergymen of the Seven Heroes Shrine to faint and fall to the ground. And all this, Noah, who was concentrating on the experiment of using the dragon's sovereignty of the sun to increase the output, did not notice at all. Of course, Noah's sensing ability was not just for show. Although the approach of Wanli Yoli, K-Na, and Cantori Winterhorse, because he was too focused, Noah did not notice at all. But when he was attacked and felt hostility, malice, and killing intent, it was impossible for Noah's sensing ability not to wake Noah up. Under such circumstances, the black divine sword pierced through the air like an arrow. The sharp sound of the sword piercing through the air made Noah, who had extraordinary sensing ability, open his eyes immediately. As soon as he opened his eyes, the sharp tip of the sword came straight at him, enlarging in Noah's dark pupils. Feeling the strong curse power on the divine saber, Noah's eyes narrowed. Without any hesitation, he raised a hand. Ding! As a crisp sound came, the sharp tip of the divine sword was caught between two of Noah's fingers before it could touch Noah's pupils and pierce his eyes. It stopped in mid-air. Wah! K-Na was shocked. He blocked Tian Tsongyun's attack with his fingers. He blocked the attack of a god relic with his bare hands. Cantori Winterhorse was stunned too. Are you kidding me? Wanli Gu Yoli directly covered his small mouth with a look of disbelief. The so-called god relic was a general term for the weapons, tools, and equipment used by gods. The divine sword named Tian Tsongyun was one of them. In the world of Xiaoya, it was called a relic. In the world of Xiaoya, it was called a godhead weapon. No matter which world it was in, such a famous divine sword was blocked by Noah with two of his fingers. I see. Is it a god relic? Noah's frown disappeared slowly. It's indeed amazing. Unfortunately, this body has impenetrable power. No matter how powerful the god relic is, it can't pierce through my body. Noah extended his other hand and flicked the black divine sword as soon as he was done speaking. Clang! As the loud sound of a bell was heard, the divine sword named Tian Tsongyun was flicked away by Lin Huang's finger. It spun in the air and eventually stabbed into the ground not far away from the door. At that moment, golden ripples that looked like water ripples appeared again. Chains popped out and wrapped around the divine sword. The famous divine sword was bound to the ground and could no longer move. The outcome had been decided. It only took 1 second. Chapter 1407. Clang, 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 clang. The pitch-black divine saber that was tightly bound by the chains trembled uncontrollably, rubbing against the chains that bound it tightly. Crisp clashing sounds rang out continuously, reverberating through the air. However, no matter how hard the black sword struggled, it could not break free from the chains. Noah only got up from his bed when he saw that. I knew it. I thought it was strange that a god relic would have a consciousness. The divine knife named Tian Songyun clearly had a mind of its own. It attacked Noah on its own accord. However, Noah had never heard of a god relic having a consciousness. Noah glanced at the struggling pitch-black divine blade, then turned his gaze to Huina. Although the sword is a god relic, it's not Susanu's sword in Japanese mythology. It's a subordinate god that was born from the god's power, am I right? Huina was slightly shocked when she heard that. She nodded immediately. Yes, although Kusanagi is a god relic, it's not the real Kusanagi sword in Japanese mythology. It's a subordinate god of the god that I serve. A subordinate god. It was also a type of god. Just like how Noah had servants like Letitia, Pesht, and Ashtar, in all kinds of myths and legends, the gods also had their own god subordinate to them. Such subordinates were called subordinate gods. Subordinate gods did not have a fixed form nor a fixed identity. Some of them were gods that had a deep relationship with the god that they served in the myths. Some of them were gods like Kusanagi's sword that were part of the god's power that they served in the myths. In terms of strength, they were inferior to the god slayer and the disobedient god. However, it was still stronger than the divine beasts and the like. Of course, a subordinate god like Kusanagi's sword that appeared in the form of a god relic in myths was more outstanding in terms of the weapon aspect. The amount of power that could be unleashed depended entirely on the user's ability to use it. In other words, the Kusanagi sword that Huina had was not the real Kusanagi sword in Japanese mythology. It was the subordinate god of the Kusanagi sword's owner, the famous Susanu. It possessed the functions of a god relic as well as the identity of a god. However, it was not the real deal. That was why Noah's Enkidu was able to restrain it. Because it had the side of being a subordinate god, it naturally possessed divinity. Now, I finally understand. Noah turned his gaze to Gon Chi Dong Ma and suddenly smiled. One of your elders who live in seclusion, the true identity of the god of disobedience is Susanu, right? Winter Horse Gon Chi nodded with a bitter smile. Susanu. In Japanese mythology, it was a very famous divinity. Speaking of Susanu, Izanagi and Izanami must also be mentioned. Izanagi and Izanami were the father and mother gods in Japanese mythology. All the gods in Japanese mythology were created by these two gods in various ways or gave birth to their children. Susanu was Izanagi's son. Susanu's full name was Susanu. He possessed many attributes and was known as the god of storm. He was also known as the god of destruction because of his violent nature. At the same time, he possessed the divinity of the god of earth. Later on, he became the god of conquest and the god of heroes because of various mythical deeds. This god could control storms and was also a user of steel. When this god was mentioned, it was impossible not to think of him as the most famous god in Japanese mythology. In order to save the girl who was sacrificed to the famous monster in Japanese mythology, Yamada no Orochi, Susanu killed Yamada no Orochi and took a sword from its tail. That sword was the Kusanagi sword, also known as the Kusanagi sword. Since then, Susanu became the hero who killed Yamada no Orochi, also known as the god of steel. The Kusanagi sword was later passed down in Japan and became a symbol of royalty because of its special status. In fact, In Noah's Gate of Babylon, the famous king's sword was also sleeping. That was why Noah understood that the pitch-black divine blade in front of him was not the real heavenly sword of clouds. However, from the fact that the sword was Susanu's subordinate god, it was not an exaggeration to call it the real thing. After all, this sword was a subordinate god that Susanu created based on his own legend in the myths. Unfortunately, although the sword had Susanu's divine power, it did not have a symbol of royalty. That was because the Kusanagi sword had been passed down from Susanu's hands to the next generation. In Noah's Gate of Babylon, the Kusanagi sword's ability was a symbol of royalty. It was the way of the king and the sword of the king. The sword in front of him was just a divine relic and a subordinate god that embodied Susanu's power. Presumably, the sword's ability should be similar to Susanu's authority, right? Susanu, the conquering god of steel. Noah thought to himself. The sleeping strongest steel that Pandora mentioned shouldn't be that guy, right? With that in mind, Wanligu Yoli suddenly stepped forward with a face full of anger. He directly rushed in front of Noah and shouted loudly. Mr. Noah! What the hell are you doing? Ha! Noah was shocked. Noah was not the only one who was shocked. Even K-Na and Kaneji Winterhorse were shocked. Wanligu did not notice at all and continued to shout angrily. Do you know what you've done? Do you know how much trouble you've brought to the people around you? Noah was a little confused. What have I done? You've done something that doesn't fit your status at all. Wanligu approached Noah with an extremely strong aura. You're a king. Since you're a king, you should think more about the people around you. I realize that you don't realize how much influence you have. Please reflect on yourself. Noah, who was shocked by Wanligu's strong aura, was stunned. He only realized it when he came back to his senses. Wanligu Yoli's pretty face was less than 10 centimeters away from his own face because her whole body was close to his. This made Noah feel a little uncomfortable and he laughed bitterly. Although I don't know what happened, it should be my experiment that affected you a little. If you want to lecture me, I'll listen to you properly later. So, calm down first. Your face is too close. Wanligu only noticed this now. Her pretty face turned red and she quickly moved away. She held her burning face and cried softly as if she was about to cry. What did I do? Only now did she feel embarrassed. Wasn't it a little too late? Noah couldn't help but laugh. At the same time, he felt that this innocent girl was quite cute. At this time, Hui Na and Gonchi Dongma finally reacted from the sudden situation. As expected of a king. Even Tian Songyun was defeated in an instant. Although the lack of a user was one of the reasons, when Tian Songyun showed his true strength, even I couldn't do anything. Hui Na said with a happy expression. A king's strength is actually so strong. That's too strong. Was it strong? However, Noah had only used one hand to send Tian Songyun flying. Let alone authority, he didn't even use magic or magic. Of course, Noah's body had taken possession of the Leo constellation Sun Sovereign, making him invulnerable. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to subdue Tian Songyun in a second. At the very least, he would have been able to fight for a few seconds. Thinking about this, Noah couldn't help but scratch his cheeks and shrug. Then, he looked at Hui Na. That's right, who are you? Hearing Noah's words, Hui Na finally remembered the purpose of her trip. Sorry, Hui Na forgot to introduce herself. Hui Na's gentle smile was comparable to that of a well-educated young miss. However, she didn't bow. Instead, she tilted her head and closed her eyes as she said this with a smile. I am Hui Na from Clear Autumn Courtyard. At the king's request, I came to become the king's follower, Witch Yuan. Please take care of me, my king. Chapter 1408. Chincho Courtyard. Noah looked at Keiko in surprise. Chincho Courtyard. Are you referring to that Chincho Courtyard? In Japan, there are 4 leading families in the world of Japanese magic. They were the Chincho Courtyard, the Jifuzuka Courtyard, the Lianqing Courtyard, and the Sayako Courtyard. These 4 families were the 4 ancient families that had served the emperor since ancient times. They had an extremely ancient history and noble origins. Today, the 4 families stood at the pinnacle of the entire Japanese spell world. Among them, the Sayako Courtyard was the core of the Official History Compilation Committee. The founder of the Official History Compilation Committee was the former head of the Sayako Courtyard. The Chincho Courtyard was a family that specialized in martial arts and political power. Once, the 4 families competed with each other for fame and fortune. In the end, the Sayako Courtyard won the battle. Therefore, the Official History Compilation Committee of Japan's spell world had the Sayako Courtyard as its core. Apart from the fact that the committee was founded by the Sayako Courtyard, this was also part of the reason. In view of this, the Sayako Courtyard, the Official History Compilation Committee, had the right to dispatch members of the other 3 families. Despite this, the Chincho Courtyard's political influence was also extraordinary. Even if they were dispatched by the Official History Compilation Committee, they were still the leader of the Japanese spell world. Even the core of the Official History Compilation Committee, the Sayako Courtyard, could not ignore their influence. That's right. Hui nodded with a naive expression that made it impossible for anyone to see through her. Keiko is the only daughter of the Chincho Courtyard. Everyone says that Keiko will inherit the Chincho Courtyard sooner or later, but it doesn't matter to Keiko whether she can inherit it or not. In addition, Keiko Courtyard was also a witch. Moreover, she was the head witch of the current generation. Since young, she worshipped Susanoo as a witch. She could listen to the voice of the gods and borrow the power of the gods. Susanoo even gave her the divine sword Tingyun. She was a genius in the Japanese spell world. This was Keiko Courtyard's Keiko Courtyard. Just like what Kaneko said, Keiko Courtyard's Keiko Courtyard was second to none in the world. Although she could only borrow a fraction of the power, this level of power was enough to put Keiko Courtyard's Keiko Courtyard above Erika and Liliana. If Erika and Liliana were the prodigies of the European magic world, then Keiko Courtyard's Keiko Courtyard was the prodigy of the Japanese spell world. Keiko Courtyard's Keiko Courtyard. Keiko Courtyard's Keiko Courtyard's Keiko Courtyard Keiko Courtyard. Keiko Courtyard's Keiko Courtyard's Keiko Courtyard. Keiko Courtyard, in other words, the divine power you borrowed is Susanoo's power, right? Keiko said Keiko. Grandfather said that the king needs me, so he sent me to the king's side. No matter what the king wants to do to me, I have to obey. No matter what. Wanli-gu Yoli's pretty face turned red again. It was unknown whether or not he had thought of something wrong. Oh. Winter Horse Gonchi narrowed his eyes. Are you going to use this trick? Noah was also a little speechless, but then he suddenly smiled. He walked up to Keiko Courtyard's Keiko Courtyard and reached out his hand. Keiko Courtyard was stunned. He lifted the girl's chin. Then, if I ask you to deal with the god you worship, will you listen? This sentence made Keiko Courtyard's Keiko Courtyard and Keiko Courtyard's breathing stagnate at the same time. Keiko Courtyard's Keiko Courtyard was also a little stunned, but then she felt shy because the corner of Noah's mouth was slightly raised. Keiko Courtyard's Keiko Courtyard's Keiko Courtyard's Keiko Courtyard's Keiko Courtyard. If Keiko Courtyard's Keiko Courtyard's Keiko Courtyard will help you. From Keiko Courtyard's words, although she called Susanoo Courtyard's Keiko Courtyard, she didn't have any relationship with the god. But, that's true. Susanoo Courtyard was also a god. Even if one of the elders of the Japanese magic circle was living in seclusion in the hidden world, he would still point out the happenings in the modern world. So, he would probably only pay attention to matters related to gods and godslayers, right? As a high and mighty god, building a relationship with ordinary humans was not an option for that guy at all. Keiko Courtyard called him Keiko Courtyards, Keiko Courtyards, Keiko Courtyards, Keiko Courtyards, Keiko Courtyard. Understanding this point, Noah somewhat understood what kind of position those elders living in seclusion in the secluded world played. Simply put, they were a group of people who took advantage of their seniority. Sure enough, no matter where one went, there would always be annoying people. Clang, 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 clang. At this time, Tian Songyun was still trembling. It kept rubbing against the chains that bound it tightly. The blade was also surging with a powerful curse power. It seemed like it was unwilling to accept this result. Everyone looked at Tian Songyun and then looked at each other. It looks like Tian Songyun still wants to fight, Hui Na said helplessly. Your Majesty, do you want to accompany it? Forget it. Noah let go of Hui Na's chin and said with a lack of interest. If it's only at the level of a subordinate god, then it's not even worth me taking it seriously. Besides, I also said that my body has the grace of invulnerability. That knife can't do anything to me at all. Plus, I promise to live here as an ordinary person as possible. So, I'll leave it to you. Hearing this, Wanli Gyuli cast a grateful look at Noah. Winter Horse Mandala said helplessly, even subordinate gods can't be serious. Should I say, as expected of the most terrifying god slayer? If that was the case. Only Hui Na sighed as if she was extremely troubled. Tian Songyun is usually very nice, but when he gets angry, even I can't do anything. Even if the king asked me to deal with him, I don't know what to do. Although she said that, Hui Na still walked towards Tian Songyun. No matter what, let's put Tian Songyun away first. After saying that, Hui Na extended her hand towards Tian Songyun, who was tightly bound. At this moment, Noah sensed something strange and frowned. His eyes hardened as he suddenly opened his mouth to speak. Be careful. Unfortunately, it was too late to say anything. Hui Na's hand gripped the handle of Tian Songyun's knife tightly. At that moment, a surge of curse power surged out of Tian Songyun's blade. It turned into a dense darkness and surged in all directions like a tide. The speed at which the darkness spread was indescribably fast. However, Noah had already sensed that something was amiss long ago, so it was not difficult for him to avoid it. However, when he saw Wanli Gyuli and Hui Na being covered by the darkness, Noah clicked his tongue and relaxed his tense body, allowing the darkness to swallow him. Then, the feeling of the world spinning attacked Noah's body. When he came to his senses, Noah was already in an unknown forest. When Noah opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was an emerald green mountain. The smell of soil and trees was very strong. There was a small stream flowing by the side. However, it was raining cats and dogs, and the wind was howling as it blew across the entire world. Noah looked around, and it didn't take him long to find a small house. It was a Japanese-style wooden house that seemed to have appeared in ancient times. Looking at the small house, Noah narrowed his eyes slightly, lifted his foot, and walked in that direction without hesitation. Not long after, Noah arrived at the door of the house. Without any hesitation, Noah reached out and opened the door. In the next moment, a figure appeared in front of Noah. You're finally here. It's so hard to see you. The person who said this was an old man sitting cross-legged in front of an old-fashioned fireplace. He was very tall and wore a rough kimono. Even through the cloth, one could still see the bulging muscles of the old man. He had a strong body that did not match his age. I'm sorry. I used my family's witch in Tian Songyun as a medium to bring you here. The old man was not apologetic at all. Anyway, come in first. Chapter 1409. Inside the wooden hut, the old man was holding a bottle of wine and was happily drinking from it. Noah did not pay any attention to the old man and instead looked to the side of the old man. Over there, Kusanagi, whose entire body was burning with curse energy, was stabbed into the ground, emitting a clear battle intent towards Noah. The divine sword that belonged to Susanoo had not given up on fighting Noah. It was different from Susanoo, who only became of steel after slaying dragons and snakes. Kusanagi was a subordinate god, and from the moment it was born, it existed in the form of a sword and a blade. It was the most primitive and purest steel god. As a steel god, every steel god was a god of war, and a god of war. Their thirst for battle was simply unimaginable to humans. As such, after experiencing Noah's incomparable power, as the purest steel, Kusanagi, as the purest steel, released such an unrelenting battle intent towards Noah. Unfortunately, to Noah, it would be a different story if his opponent was someone worthy of respect and pleasing to the eye. However, for someone like Kusanagi, who was inexplicably harassing him, Noah did not even want to pay attention to him. However, Tian Songyun did not attack Noah directly like he did at the beginning. Although he released a shocking battle intent towards Noah, he obediently stayed by the old man's side, not moving at all. Who could make a steel like Kusanagi, who was born to fight, suppress his instincts? Who else could it be other than the main god that he was loyal to? At this moment, Noah smirked and walked into the wooden hut. He sat down on the other side of the hut, but he did not look at the old man. Instead, he looked around as if he was observing something. Since I am able to meet you face to face, that means this is the secluded world where you live in seclusion, right? Susanoo. Oh. Don't you understand the situation very well? The old god named Susanoo grinned. Although I've always wanted to meet you, it's a pity that going to the modern world would cause me all kinds of trouble. I can't use my own power to allow others to enter the hidden world as they please, so I can only rely on Tian Songyun and that girl Hui as a medium to bring you here. The supernatural beings that exist in myths are called gods. They only exist in myths, and the gods that jump out of myths and wander on the ground are the gods of disobedience. Noah looked at Susanoo with a smile. Then, what are you? Me. I used to be a god of disobedience, Susanoo said casually, as if he didn't care at all. After I appeared on the surface, I rampaged about for over 1,000 years. In the end, I got a little bored, so I decided to live in seclusion. In the end, I could only come to this realm between life and death. Life is the present world that can give life existence. Immortality is all kinds of myths and legends. The gods that only exist in myths and legends jumped out of the realm of immortality and came to the world of life, and became disobedient gods. When disobedient gods are defeated, they will return to the realm of immortality. However, a god like Susanoo who used to be a disobedient god and got tired of his life as a disobedient god, and no one could defeat him, so where should he go? Naturally, he could only come to the hidden world to live in seclusion. Because the hidden world is the hidden world, this world is between the modern world, which represents life, and the mythical world, which represents immortality. In other words, this secluded world is a gathering place for those who are neither human nor god. Especially now, those who are gathered here are people who can't let go of their attachment to the modern world. Including me, there are many things in the modern world that I can't be at ease with. Susanoo, while holding a bottle of wine and drinking it with a forthright attitude, intentionally or unintentionally mentioned it. Well, to put it simply, a group of old men who supervise the young people. In order to prevent the young people in the modern world from acting recklessly, it is our duty to remind them. Sometimes, when there are characters that the young people can't deal with, it is also our duty to come out and say a few words. What he meant was that Noah's existence forced him to come out and say a few words. However, Noah snorted at this, saying, "You don't have to say so many nice words, it's not the first time I have dealt with gods like you. Even if I am no longer a disobedient god, as long as I am a god, my mission is more important than anything else." As he said that, Noah spoke as if he was referring to something else. "In the end, you can't be saying that as a god, you are actually very concerned about the safety of humans, so you couldn't help but jump out and talk to me, right?" Ha 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 ha. Susanoo suddenly burst into laughter. "Although I also want to say that, as you said, the death of one or two humans may be a little insignificant for a god, but it also depends on the situation. Take me for example, if there is a monster like Yamada no Orochi that is endangering humans, even if there is only one human being who is about to be reduced to food, I will still save her. Thanks to this, I was able to win the heart of a beautiful woman." Sure enough, even a god has to often do good deeds. In the myth, in order to save Kita no Orochi, who was reduced to a sacrifice, Susanoo killed the snake monster and obtained the Kusanagi sword, and from then on, became the conquering god of steel. After that, the rescued Kita in Anaheim became friends with Susanoo, and the two of them got married, creating a beautiful story. When Susanoo said that he won the heart of a beautiful woman, it was indeed such a thing. Unfortunately, I am no longer that impulsive age, the task of saving the little girl will be handed over to you young men. Susanoo looked at Noah with a profound look. "Isn't that the reason why you were pulled here by me willingly? Then it's easy to say." Noah raised his eyes and looked at Susanoo's eyes, then said lightly, "Where is the Wanli Valley and the Qingqiu courtyard now? Don't tell me you don't know." However, the one who answered this question was not Susanoo, but another voice. "The foreign god killer king, the girls you are looking for are now here." This was a very clear and beautiful voice. Accompanied by such a voice, a figure suddenly appeared without any warning on the side of the stove where Noah and Susanoo were sitting opposite each other. It was an extremely beautiful woman. The clothes she was wearing seemed to be a noble princess costume during the Heian period, with bright colors, known as the 12-style kimono. Her pupils were a clear glass color, and she had long brown hair that reached her waist. Her skin was smooth and delicate like ivory. The woman had a beautiful face that seemed to be carefully carved. Her beauty was far superior to that of modern humans, giving people the feeling that she was a princess that only appeared in ancient times. Such a beautiful woman took out 3 pieces of red tomo from her long sleeve and held it in front of Noah. The hidden world is a world where the difference between reality and illusion is very ambiguous, but it is also a world where the mind is superior to the body. As long as you want to, you can instantly teleport, and as long as you want to, you can change the world. This kind of unrealistic world is very difficult for human beings to adapt to, and if you don't do anything about it, you may not even be able to keep your life. Therefore, I turned the people who came with you into dead objects to prevent this side effect. I hope you can understand." Hearing this, Noah felt relieved that a beautiful woman like a princess suddenly appeared without him noticing, but he reached out his hand and silently took the 3 tomo. At this time, another hoarse voice sounded. "I didn't expect that one of the most powerful god killers would jump into the hidden world for a few humans." As soon as he finished speaking, another person silently appeared in the small house and sat on the last empty seat around the stove. This was a monk wearing black monk robes. His skin was very dry, as if he had no real flesh, like a mummy. "Okay, everyone is here." Susanoo put the wine bottle in his hand on the ground, looked at Noah, and smiled ferociously. "Then, let's begin the negotiations. God Killer." Chapter 14:10. Negotiate. Susanoo's words made Noah look around. He glanced at Susanoo, the princess, and the monk, and finally fixed his eyes on Susanoo. "I think that what should be said to you clearly. What's the point of negotiating?" Noah's words made Tyrant's mouth twitch. Tyrant's words were like thorns in his voice. You talk big. Should I say that you're worthy of being a godslayer? That's enough. Sir, and master, we're here to talk to the king. You're being rude. It's against the rules of the conversation. The princess frowned slightly. Please be a little more careful. It's not good for us to become enemies with the king of a foreign country. Unfortunately, both Susanoo and Tyrant ignored the princess's words. One of them continued to drink, while the other shook his head, looking like a rebel. It had to be said that seeing these two people, no one would have any good impression of them. However, perhaps the two of them had such an attitude because of their self-confidence. Susanoo was a mythical god. Even if he was no longer a god of disobedience, he still had great divine power. It was estimated that in terms of strength, he was not inferior to the highest-level gods like Welslana and Mercado. As for the monk's words, Noah could clearly sense that he was not a god. However, this was a world where transcendental beings who were neither human nor god gathered. The monk in front of him was obviously not a human either. Coupled with the monk's dress, Noah felt that the monk should be a transcendent being who had cultivated his body to become a Buddha. Even if he was inferior to the god and the god-slayer, he was still a figure that humans could not reach. As for the beautiful princess, Noah almost saw through her identity at first glance. God Ancestor. She was a fallen goddess of earth. Although she was no longer a god, she was still an existence that transcended human beings. Noah, who had confronted the god ancestor Guinevere, sensed a trace of the same aura from the princess. Therefore, the princess was very likely to be a god ancestor who had existed even longer than Guinevere. A god. A Buddha. A god ancestor. 3 transcendental beings. Except for the princess, who was a god ancestor, Susanoo and the monk were so rude because of their confidence. However, when it came to confidence, Noah was not lacking in it. It was because Noah knew exactly how much power he had at the moment. When using 2 avatars, Noah's full strength could reach 3 digits of box tings. The gods and god-slayers in this world were between 4 and 5 digits. The highest was only 4 digits. Susanoo, the monk, and the god ancestor, the strongest one should be Susanoo, who had wreaked havoc in the world as the god of disobedience for more than 1,000 years. However, Susanoo's strength was probably at the middle of the 4-digit range, not the top, let alone the 3-digit range. For Noah, Susanoo was not a threat. Of course, Noah's authority was still in the process of adapting and could not be used casually. Even so, with Noah's current power, he could reach 4 digits. Coupled with the Sun Sovereign and many precious artifacts, his combat power was definitely not inferior to Susanoo. If he really fought with Susanoo, Noah was absolutely confident that he could win. As for the reason why, it was simply because Noah had a trump card that could restrain the gods. Clang! With a crisp sound of collision, a long spear suddenly appeared in Noah's hand without any warning. Noah stabbed the spear into the ground. Susanoo, the monk, and the princess were shocked. They all looked at the source of the sound. Then their pupils suddenly shrank, and their faces became dignified. Buzz! In the slight trembling sound, the red spear with a forked tip emitted an ancient and sacred aura, filling the whole space. Putting the monk and the princess aside, Susanoo could clearly feel it. The aura emitted from the strangely shaped spear made the heart of the famous hero god in Japanese mythology surge with unprecedented warning signs. Susanoo had never felt such a sense of danger for thousands of years. The keen intuition of a god told Susanoo. The spear was dangerous. Very dangerous. Buzz, 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 buzz. At the same time, the kusanagi that was stabbed into the ground next to Susanoo began to tremble violently. The incantation power that surrounded it became chaotic and violent. It was similar to Susanoo. As Susanoo's god follower, the kusanagi also felt a threat that it had never felt before from the strangely shaped spear. That kind of threat was like an innate instinct that was being suppressed. It was extremely strong. Don't you have something interesting? Susanoo's playful expression gradually disappeared as he looked straight at Noah. Is that a type of god relic? It's not an exaggeration to say that in this world. However, it's different from your broken sword. Mine is the real deal. Noah met Susanoo's gaze and smirked. I just want to say that there's a limit to my patience. You can challenge me if you want. If you want to fight, I'll take you on any time. However, if you've asked me to come here just to see you guys put on airs, after saying this, Noah suddenly reached out his hand and grabbed the monk's collar. He pulled the monk in front of him and stared coldly at the monk's shriveled face that was like a mummy's. Let's fight then. I don't have time to waste on people like you who like to play games. You. The monk's shriveled face was contorted in anger. Susanoo's face turned grim as well. He was no longer as carefree as he was just now. At this moment, Susanoo and the monk finally realized what was going on. The person in front of them seemed rational, but it did not mean that he was not impulsive. He had killed 2 of the highest level gods when he first appeared. He had defeated 3 of his kind as soon as he became a god slayer. It would be unbelievable if he did not have a temper. Noah was adjusting his style based on the situation and the person. He could do anything to those who he could get along with. However, he could be stubborn to those who he could not get along with. If they were unhappy, they could fight him. It was such a crude principle. Rakshasa king from a foreign country, please calm down, the princess said immediately when she snapped back to her senses. We don't mean any harm. Just because we don't mean any harm, it doesn't mean that we won't be enemies. Otherwise, why would the relationship between a god slayer and a god of disobedience be so complicated? Noah pushed the monk who was glaring at him away. He glanced at Susanoo who was gloomy and then looked at the princess. I'm sorry. I don't get along with these 2 fellas. I don't hate you, so I'll let you do the talking. As for you. Noah glanced at Susanoo and the monk. Shut up and watch, don't make me angry. The impolite words made Susanoo and Tyrant's face turn ugly. What? Susanoo smiled rudely, but there was no smile in his eyes. Aren't you very capable? In the myths, Susanoo was famous for his violent temperament, so he was responsible for controlling the violent storms. He was also known as the god of destruction. Although Susanoo had been wandering for thousands of years, it didn't mean that he had lost his temper after thousands of years. Now, Susanoo was obviously angry. However, looking at Susanoo in such a state, Noah only smiled suddenly. He reached out his hand and placed it on the strangely shaped crimson spear beside him. Then, he slowly pulled it out. Susanoo suddenly became vigilant. A terrible idea finally emerged in Tyrant's mind. The princess could no longer maintain her elegance, and her face was full of anxiety. In such a situation, Noah slowly stood up and said to himself, It seems that before we talk, it is necessary to let you understand the difference between the primary and secondary. After that, Noah pointed the spear in his hand at Susanoo and sneered. Go outside. Susanoo narrowed his eyes, and his body burned with surging curse power. Interesting, isn't it? The battle was about to start. Chapter 14:11. Secluded World, also known as the Realm of Life and Undying, was a very mysterious world. Not only was the boundary between reality and illusion very ambiguous, but it also allowed people to do many inconceivable things just by thinking about it. It was also a world where the mind was superior to the body. With just a thought, anyone could teleport. However, teleportation could only be done in different spaces. Secluded World was actually not a world with only one space, but a wonderful world formed by combining many different spaces. For example, Secluded World could be considered a building, and the spaces in secluded world were the rooms in the building. Although all the rooms were in the same building, they were separated by walls. This was how secluded world existed. It was a world made up of multiple isolated spaces. This was secluded world. It was because this world was formed by many different spaces that it could allow those existences to live in it. For example, the god of disobedience. Just by appearing, he would bring about phenomena related to his own attributes. If the god of fire descended, everything around him would become incomparably hot. If the god of sea descended, a tsunami comparable to the end of the world would descend along with it. For these kinds of existences, as long as they chose to live in seclusion in secluded world, they would only affect the space they were in, and would not affect other spaces. Therefore, under normal circumstances, if there was no reason, the existences in secluded world would not go to other spaces of their own kind. Pandora was the same. The goddess, who was the birth mother of the god Slayer, lived in this realm of life and undying, and stayed in a space that was difficult for ordinary people to go to. Generally speaking, although the spaces in secluded world were separated from each other, there was still a trace of connection between the spaces in secluded world, making each space in secluded world like a spider web. Therefore, in this world where the mind was superior to the body, people could rely on their imagination to let their bodies pass through these spider web-like connections, and instantly teleport to other spaces. However, it was said that Pandora's space was not so easy to reach. As for the specific reason, Noah did not know. This was the first time he had come to this world with his real body, so he did not know the specific situation. Of course, Noah could still calmly exist in this world. The princess had said that most people would find it difficult to adapt to the secluded world. If he did not use some special methods, even if he came to the secluded world, he would collapse due to excessive discomfort and eventually lose his life. However, the god Slayer had an extremely tenacious life force. This world itself would not reject Noah's existence. No matter how long Noah stayed here, there would not be any side effects. Under such circumstances, the group of people came out of the wooden house and came to the open space by the riverbank. Voila! The heavy downpour was mixed with the storm, wreaking havoc in the surroundings. Noah and Susanu stood facing each other, separated from each other by a certain distance. At the side, Tyrant and Princess stood side by side. When they saw this scene, their expressions were completely different. The monk's face was filled with schadenfreude and mockery. The princess looked worried and restless. Why did things turn out this way? The princess sighed slightly and glanced at the monk. I think the sorcerer should be very clear about the reason, right? If not for Susanu and the monk's arrogant and sloppy attitude, which was simply looking for trouble and provocation, things would not have turned out this way. However, the monk did not have the slightest self-awareness. No. It should be said that the monk had the self-awareness, but he did not look like he was reflecting at all. Isn't this good? The monk sneered. Let the old mister teach that ridiculously young foreign king a good lesson. It will be good for the following conversation, won't it? Then, what if it's the other way around? The princess retorted. What if the old mister loses to the Rakshasa king in the end? That's impossible. The monk said without hesitation. Gods and gods layers, if it was that easy to determine the winner, there wouldn't only be 7 demon kings in this world. Even if that kid killed 2 gods at the same time to become a god slayer, and defeated 3 of his kind at the same time, and praised him to the heavens, if he wants to defeat a god, it's useless to rely on such a superficial difference in combat strength. Whether it was a god slayer or a disobedient god, they could not be judged by common sense. The simplest example was that if a god and a human were to fight, no one would think that the latter would win. However, some humans stood out and miraculously killed a god, which led to the birth of a god slayer. Therefore, if one were to judge the outcome of a battle between a god slayer and a god based solely on the difference in combat strength, the result would often be shocking. Let's not talk about other things. In the past, when Noah succeeded in becoming a god slayer, during the 3 months he was active in Italy, he also met many gods. However, because of the god's tenacious vitality, he did not succeed in killing the third disobedient god and obtaining new power. From this point of view, the monk's words were undoubtedly correct. The princess also agreed with this statement. However, that was under normal circumstances. The princess could not help but look at the strangely shaped spear in Noah's hand, which exuded an extremely sacred and ancient aura. As a god ancestor, the princess's sharp spiritual sense told her that spear was very likely to subvert this common sense. Otherwise, Noah would not have so easily started a fight with Susanu. Under the gaze of the princess and the monk, Noah, who was in the middle of the storm, was completely drenched, holding the strangely shaped spear in his hand and looking forward. There, Susanu was also holding the Kusanagi sword tightly, looking at Noah with a ferocious and ruthless expression, grinning, showing the violent temperament of the god of destruction and the god of conquest side to the fullest. "Are you ready, boy?" "What?" Noah raised the spear in his hand and pointed at Susanu. "Don't tell me you want me to respect you and let you have 3 moves first." "No, I just want to tell you one thing." Susanu's rock-hard face showed a happy expression. "I haven't had a decent fight for a long time. Don't let me down, the youngest godslayer." As soon as he finished speaking, a burst of fierce curse power burst out from Susanu's body, turning into a flame-like flame that slowly burned and covered Susanu's whole body. Seeing this, Noah curled his lips and smiled. The energy in the energy source in his body was instantly converted into magic power and poured into the spear in his hand, causing the surging magic power to swell. The 2 violent curses suddenly turned into a raging wind, which shook Noah and Susanu, respectively, dispersing the surrounding storm. Whoosh! The next moment, 2 figures, also wrapped in a powerful spell, shot out like arrows almost at the same time. They were so fast that even the princess and the monk could only see 2 vague shadows. Then, the 2 figures, like meteorites, with an indescribable impact, fiercely collided with each other in a very shocking way. Ding! When the 2 vague figures collided with each other, the moment they passed each other, a crisp sound of collision shook the air. That was the sound of the sharp spear thrusting out like lightning, but it was blocked by the divine sword like a heavy shield, causing sparks to fly everywhere, and a small circle of energy ripple stirred up the sound of sparks. "Did you beat me to it?" Susano laughed out loud. "Then it's my turn." While speaking, Susano raised the Tian Songyun in his hand directly above his head and slashed down at Noah in front of him. Swoosh! On the pitch-black divine blade, a strong gust of wind tore the air apart. The sharp sound of the wind breaking was heard, which made people's eardrums tingle. Facing this fierce slash, Noah's eyes flashed, and relying on his amazing arm strength, he fiercely swung the red spear from the bottom to the top. Clang! A bell-like sound reverberated in the air, setting off a strong wind that rushed in all directions, causing cracks to appear on the ground where Noah and Susano were standing. Chapter 14:12. Clang! The blade and the spear collided with each other, causing a crisp sound. The eyes of the god slayer holding the holy spear and the god of disobedience holding the divine blade were burning with unyielding fighting spirit. They mercilessly swung their weapons that would go down in history at each other. Clang! 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 The fierce sound of collision continued as the holy spear and the divine blade collided and shook the space, and frequently set off bursts of sparks that couldn't be extinguished even in the storm. In Japanese mythology, the hero who killed the snake and slayed the dragon was simply like a storm, with a trace of warlike laughter. Like a violent storm, the divine blade in his hand violently slashed more than a dozen times in a very short period of time, causing pieces of blade shadows to flicker together with the arc light in the space, like a crescent moon slashing forward. That skill was worthy of its name. An amazing skill that only gods had the means to use, but it was vividly displayed by this god who had been wandering for thousands of years. In the face of such an amazing skill, Noah was like a windmill, relying on the same amazing physical strength. He heavily swung the holy spear. If Susanoo was the pinnacle of skill, then Noah was the pinnacle of strength. Every time Susanoo used his amazing divine skills to continuously wave out a storm of slashes, Noah would not be outdone and fiercely sweep out with a blow that could split mountains and split rocks. This sweep was like a gust of wind sweeping away the fallen leaves, sweeping away all the slashes that flashed together with the light in the space, and bouncing off the divine blade. This scene had been going on for quite some time. However, the attack and defense of the two people did not change at all. Noah has been standing in the same place, without moving. He just swung the holy spear, making the holy spear bring out a burst of whistling sound. Susanoo wanted to violently crush Noah countless times, but every time, he was swept away by the terrible power of the holy spear, which was like a windmill that was swung by the holy spear like a windmill, and he couldn't succeed in making Noah take a step back. Clang! 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 The attack and defense that only appeared in myths and legends continued. The continuous sound of collisions rang out, accompanied by dazzling sparks that appeared in the storm. The holy spear that swept across like a windmill and the divine blade that slashed like moonlight continued to collide. Clang! At a certain moment, a sound that was clearer than any of the previous clashes reverberated through the air. Goo! Susanoo couldn't help but let out a muffled groan as he was once again swept away, and continuously retreated dozens of steps before stopping. This time, Susanoo didn't continue his frenzied attacks. Instead, he rotated his numb arm and stared at Noah, who was casually raising the holy spear. So that's how it is. Although his skills are lacking, his arm strength is incomparably shocking. In terms of skills, other than the sword, Noah was only proficient at the level of an average person. Although it couldn't be said to be unpresentable, in front of a god with a divine skill, it was indeed quite inadequate. However, Noah had an amazing physical ability. After reaching LV5, and all the basic abilities reached the SSS stage, Noah's physical ability had already reached the level of a god. In addition, if one observed carefully, they would find that Noah's hands and feet were still surrounded by magic lines like electric wires, which was obviously a sign of the use of enhanced magic. With these two superimposed, even compared with the 16 Knights in reverse, Noah's physical ability would not be the slightest bit weaker. Naturally, it was beyond the level of ordinary gods. In other words, Noah was now relying on his amazing physical ability to fight. Just like the 16 Knights in reverse. No wonder you have some confidence. Although I don't know what kind of power it is, it doesn't seem to be the power of a god. You can train a body that is not weaker than a god, or even better than a god by yourself. No wonder you can become the leader of the generation of god slayers. Susanoo seemed to deliberately say it to Noah and shouted loudly. However, in this case, there is no way to defeat a god. As soon as his words fell, Susanoo stomped on the ground with a force that broke the ground and rushed towards Noah. In his hand, the dark divine sword also slashed out violently. In an instant, several sword shadows were formed in the space. It was still the same divine sword skill as before. However, this time, the trajectory of the sword's shadow suddenly changed halfway, causing the original storm-like offensive to change completely. It became like the rolling waves of the sea, wave after wave, with a kind of endless and continuous entanglement. Noah's brows suddenly wrinkled, but he still picked up the holy spear and violently waved it at the incoming sword's shadow. Clang! Another crisp sound of collision rang out. However, almost in an instant, Noah's expression changed slightly. Because, with amazing strength, the holy spear smashed heavily on Susanoo's divine sword, but Susanoo's divine sword was not repelled as usual. Instead, it was entangled by a snake, and in a burst of fierce sparks, the spear and the divine sword violently rubbed against each other. Ha 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 ha. Susanoo burst out laughing. You have been hit. God Slayer. While laughing, Susanoo's hand did not stop, and the divine sword that was entangled with the holy spear suddenly turned into a cold light, and directly shot towards Noah's heart. This attack, there was no room for mercy. If hit, Noah would at least be seriously injured on the spot and lose the ability to fight. Unfortunately, for Noah, this attack was no threat at all. Clang! The sharp pitch-black divine sword directly pierced Noah's heart, and it actually caused a crisp sound of steel hitting steel, and even sparks of friction. This incredible scene finally made Susanoo's wild laughter stop on his rock-like face. It was just a moment. Whoosh! He saw, Noah turned around and kicked a powerful kick in the direction of Susanoo. Bang! Susanoo, who did not have time to react, was directly kicked in the chest with a powerful force, and with a muffled sound, his whole body was kicked out. Whoosh! The terrifying strange force acted on Susanoo's body, and his whole body turned into a cannonball, and with a sharp sound of breaking the air, he finally hit the rock wall of a cliff, and directly smashed the cliff wall, and pieces of rocks fell to the ground. Bang, 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 bang. Pieces of rock smashed into the ground, causing a series of heavy muffled sounds to resound. Susanoo was directly buried by the rocks, and in an instant, his figure disappeared. However, it was only for a moment. Bang! In the next moment, a storm rose from the center of the pile of rocks, and directly lifted the huge rocks. In the center of the storm, Susanoo slowly stood up, raised his head, and shot straight in the direction of Noah like an arrow. You're quite capable, boy. A trace of blood flowed down from the corner of Susanoo's mouth. Can you have an invulnerable body? Is that your power? Susanoo narrowed his eyes. Invulnerability is usually a power possessed by the god of steel. Could it be that you've killed a steel somewhere? You talk a lot of nonsense, don't tell me you expect the opponent to tell you his ability in a duel. Noah said so, and the corner of his mouth slowly rose. Compared to this, shouldn't you be more concerned about that broken sword of yours? If you don't pay attention to it, it will break. Hearing this, Susanoo's face changed, and he suddenly turned his head and looked at the Tian Songyun in his hand, and then, his face changed again. Because on the body of the famous divine sword, there were cracks all over it, and the Tian Songyun looked like a glass that was about to break, and it was too horrible to look at. You also said that my skill is not good. In that case, why should I use this spear? Noah raised the holy spear in his hand and pointed it at Susanoo from afar, which was emitting a sacred and ancient aura. That is because this spear exists to bury gods like you. Chapter 14:13. It was the spear of Longinus. It was a god-killing holy spear that only worked on individuals with divinity. The higher the divinity of the opponent, the more damage it could inflict. Someone like Susanoo, who was directly created by the father god in Japanese mythology, would have a high divinity. As long as he was stabbed by the spear, there was almost no chance of him surviving. However, although the holy spear was powerful, it would only work if it could hit its target. If it could not hit its target, it would be useless. Therefore, in the past, when Noah used this holy spear, he would first use the Enkidu to bind the opponent, then use the Longinus to attack. However, Noah did not use the Enkidu at the beginning of the battle with Susanoo. This was because Susanoo had Tian Songyun in his hand. Not only was the divine sword a god relic, but it was also Susanoo's subordinate god. It was similar to a demigod with divinity. Therefore, even if Lin Huang did not use the Enkidu to bind it, he would still be able to inflict damage on the divine sword if he used the spear of Longinus. However, Tian Songyun was only a subordinate god. Its divinity was not as high as Susanoo's. It was only comparable to a demigod. If its divinity was lower, the damage that the spear of Longinus could inflict would be weaker. However, no matter how weak it was, the damage that was accumulated from the countless collisions would almost reach the critical point of the divine sword. So, Noah waved the holy spear in his hand and stared at Susanoo, who had a change of expression. "It's my turn to attack now." Noah raised his empty hand as soon as he finished speaking. Buzz! Suddenly, golden ripples appeared in the air around Noah. Golden light flowed on the surface of the ripples. There were wedges of different shapes at the front of the chains. The crisp sound of the chains could be heard as they shot toward Susanoo. Susanoo finally couldn't keep his calm anymore. This was because the chains that shot towards him were as threatening as the strange spear in Noah's hand. It would be bad if he was caught by the chains. Susanoo's heart was filled with a strong sense of alarm. Immediately, Susanoo's body was surrounded by a strong gust of wind. He lifted his strong body and flew up into the air. Amidst the crisp sound of chains clanging against each other, the chains suddenly turned around and rushed toward Susanoo, who was flying in the air. Susanoo was speechless. He immediately controlled the wind and turned it into a hurricane. It was like a tornado that swept across the sky and retreated at an extremely fast speed. However, the rain of chains didn't give up and continued to chase after Susanoo. It was as if the rain of chains was following closely behind Susanoo. Therefore, in the stormy weather, the tornado and the chains that were glowing with a dazzling golden light began a chase under the dark clouds. Moreover, both of them were moving at an extremely fast speed. Looking at this scene, even the princess and the monk's expressions began to turn anxious. Those chains. The tyrant stared at the chains that were chasing after the tornado. Is that a type of god relic too? I think so. Ordinary weapons can't threaten a god. However, you can't ignore the weapon that the Devil King is using. The princess was in disbelief as well. What exactly did the Devil King use to be able to use those god relics so easily? Just as the name implied, god relics referred to all the weapons, tools that God used. Almost every god relic had a unique power that contained wisdom that humans could not replicate. It was a true god's weapon. Usually, only gods could use god relics. Apart from gods, it was impossible for humans to use god relics unless they could find a complicated way to use them. Take Hui Na for example. The reason why she could use the Kusanagi cloud was that she could borrow a god's power. Hui Na could only use the Kusanagi cloud after obtaining the god relic's approval by possessing Susanoo's divine power. Humans would not be able to use god relics if they did not use such a roundabout method. However, Noah could use god relics without any hindrance. Could that be the power of an authority too? The princess and the tyrant had the same thought. After all, apart from Erica and Liliana, the rest had no idea what kind of authority Noah had obtained exactly. Even Erica and Liliana only knew half of it. They did not know Noah's authority completely. Therefore, Noah's authority was still a mystery to the rest. Only Alice and Tony had more or less grasped some information. However, even these people had no idea what it was. Noah had tens of thousands of relics that were on par with god relics. Seeing that the Enkidu was unable to catch up to the tornado that was known for its speed, Noah's brows furrowed slightly before he relaxed. Then, let's try this. A gigantic golden ripple spread next to Noah as soon as he was done speaking. A gigantic crossbow appeared from the ripple as if it was pushing something. The expanding mana was sucked into the crossbow, causing the arrows on the crossbow to flash with a star-like brilliance. Go after it. Kill 100 of them, 9 lives. When the real name of the relic was released, the arrow that was shining like starlight vibrated. The starlight on it grew, turning the arrow into a beam of light. The next moment, the beam of light shot out like a shooting star. It twisted in the middle and suddenly split into 9 beams of light that looked like a dragon, shooting into the sky. Susanoo, who was dodging the attack, was shocked. He turned his head and looked in a certain direction. 9 laser beams pierced through the space and flew towards Susanoo at a much faster speed than the golden chains. They circled around each other and shot towards Susanoo at a much faster speed. Susanoo's eyes widened. He quickly controlled the tornado that was circling around his body. The tornado that was flying in the air suddenly changed direction and retreated to the side. However, Susanoo did not know that dodging the attack was useless against this relic. Kill 100 of them, 9 lives. This noble phantasm was the noble phantasm of Hercules, who had a history with Noah. In Greek mythology, Hercules was given 12 impossible tasks. One of the tasks was to destroy the sea monster that wreaked havoc in the world, the Hydra. In the legend, Hercules finally overcame all kinds of difficulties and killed the Hydra with a bow and arrow. The bow and arrow that Hercules used to kill the Hydra was kill 100 of them, 9 lives. It could turn the arrow into a beam of light and then into 9 tracking lasers. It was a relic that could even kill a fantasy breed with one shot. Therefore, the beams of light suddenly changed direction, pierced through the air, separated the tornado, and suddenly caught up with Susanoo at an indescribable speed. What? Susanoo was shocked, and then his face became ferocious. Don't underestimate me. With a violent roar, Susanoo raised the Kusanagi sword in his hand and slashed 9 consecutive times at the incoming beams of light. The flashing saber light collided with the incoming beams of light. Bang! 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 In an instant, the 9 saber lights collided with the 9 beams of light, stirring up intense flames and shock waves in all directions. However, not only did Susanoo not show any joy, but his pupils shrank. Whoosh! A figure rushed out of the intense flames and shock waves and flashed in front of Susanoo. You're the one who underestimated me, you bastard god. The god-killing holy spear turned into a red light and stabbed out violently. Chapter 14:14. Whoosh! The holy spear turned into a red flash of light, and like a bolt of lightning, it pierced towards Susanoo's direction, and with a sharp sound of breaking the air, it shot towards Susanoo's heart. At this moment, the sense of crisis in Susanoo's heart surged like a tidal wave, and a look of horror appeared in his eyes. However, that was to be expected. As mentioned before, with Susanoo's divinity, once he was hit by the spear of Longinus, he would definitely die. At this moment, Susanoo's heart was filled with the shadow of death. At this critical moment, the black saber in Susanoo's hand suddenly trembled, and it didn't pass through Susanoo's hand. Instead, it lifted Susanoo's hand up into the air. At the same time, the holy spear, which turned into a red flash of light, pierced towards the black divine sword. Bang! The divine sword, which was full of scars like broken glass, finally turned into pieces under the holy spear's attack, and scattered in all directions. As one of Susanoo's subordinate gods, Tian Tsongyun sacrificed himself to block a fatal blow for the over-god. Ha! Only then did Susanoo react. He let out a roar, and the storm around his body suddenly exploded, turning into a substantial shockwave that shook the surrounding area. Noah was knocked back by the shockwave caused by the explosion. His footsteps kept moving in the air. After retreating a few hundred meters, he finally stopped. Boom! The dark clouds in the sky suddenly flashed with lightning, causing the lightning to fall from the clouds and flash through the space between Noah and Susanoo. With this storm as the background, Noah and Susanoo were facing each other in the air. Sacrificed your sword. Noah said sarcastically. What? If you want to, you can still do it, right? You don't have to laugh at me, boy. Just now, Tian Songyun voluntarily blocked the attack for me, but the so-called subordinate god is supposed to support the over-god, so I don't think it's shameful. Susanoo still had a violent smile on his face, but there was no trace of a smile in his eyes. On the contrary, you didn't show any mercy at all, and you really wanted to kill me, which surprised me a little. Didn't you say that you didn't want to be merciful from the start? Noah glanced at Susanoo. I clearly remember that after you broke through my defense, you aimed your sword at my heart. That can't be helped. Susanoo didn't hide anything. Fighting against a human hero who can kill a god, I don't have the confidence to win in the future. Then I'm the same, right? Noah said lightly. At this time, when I can't use my true power, I also don't have the confidence to defeat you if I show mercy. Oh. Susanoo raised his eyebrows. In other words, as long as you don't show mercy, you have the confidence to defeat me? Hearing this, Noah didn't answer immediately. Instead, he curled his lips and raised the holy lance in his hand, pointing it at Susanoo from afar. Didn't the attack just now fully prove this point? Yes. The attack just now had fully proved this point. Even if Noah can't use his authority yet, with his current strength, as long as he uses his full strength, he can defeat a god. Today, Noah has been reborn, and his strength is no longer the same as when he first came to this world. When he first came to this world, Noah didn't become a god slayer, and he didn't have the authority of a god. After Tony used the power of the demon sword, he was defeated in a single attack. Now, Noah was much stronger than he was back then. Even without the authority of a god, Noah still has the power to defeat a god slayer and a god of disobedience. This is a true rebirth. Susanoo didn't know that Noah didn't use his authority from the beginning to the end. However, just now, Noah did almost kill Susanoo, which fully proved the fact that if he uses his full strength, he can defeat Susanoo with 100% certainty. However, this fact made Susanoo laugh out loud. Good. Very good. In that case. Then I won't be polite. As soon as the words fell, Susanoo's body suddenly surged with a vast amount of curse power. The tsunami-like violent and rich curse power turned into a substantial storm, accompanied by Susanoo's raised hands, and while rotating, it gathered around Susanoo's body. The violent storm even formed a raging tornado, running down from the sky, connecting the whole world, and spinning crazily. Under such circumstances, the dark clouds in the sky seemed to be stirred up as if they were boiling, and the rock formations on the ground were directly dug up. Trees and gravel were directly uprooted and constantly swept into the storm, causing the storm to reach a diameter of hundreds of meters in an instant. In the center of the storm, Susanoo raised his hands and shouted loudly. God Slayer! Take the final blow that I will use up all of my divine power. Hearing Susanoo's words and feeling the terrible curse power contained in the terrifying storm, Noah's face gradually became serious, and he murmured. It seems that this is indeed your final blow. Susanoo's power is definitely not inferior to Velaslana and Mercado. In other words, this storm god is also a god of the highest level. For a deity of such a level, a blow that was charged with all the curse power in his body was equally dangerous to Noah without using his authority. If that's the case, I have to use all my strength. After saying such a sentence, Noah threw away the holy spear in his hand and let it be swallowed by the golden ripples. Immediately, another golden ripple fluctuated from Noah's side. Fortunately, this is the secluded world, a world formed by the combination of different spaces. As Noah's voice sounded, a strange-shaped sword slowly emerged from the golden ripple. Noah stretched out his hand, tightly grasped the hilt of the strange-shaped sword, and suddenly pulled it out. So, even if this sword can cut the world, it can only cut the space. It won't hurt the world itself, right? Noah raised the strange-shaped sword high above his head. Then wake up. Because of your power. Unless it's a last resort, I won't use you. It's rare to have such a stage. Cherish it. Show me all of your power. The treasure artifact named Obedient Parting Sword, EA, suddenly trembled. Whing. In the trembling sound, the three blades that made up the sword suddenly rotated, and set off a red wind pressure. The red wind pressure became more and more intense, and finally, it turned into a red storm, and also swept down from the sky, sweeping the earth. Suddenly, one red and one gray tornado directly reflected between heaven and earth, stirring up the dark clouds, cutting open the fragile earth, and letting the earth-shattering wind wreak havoc in the entire space. The princess and the monk had already retreated, and even retreated to the edge of this space, looking at the two storms that ran between heaven and earth. Their faces were full of shock. So you're also the controller of the storm? God Slayer. Susanoo laughed wildly. Very good. Very good. Is your wind stronger, or is my wind stronger? Let's have a competition. After saying that, Susanoo raised his hands high, and heavily waved them down. Whoosh! The raging gray storm turned into an impact, and as if it was trying to break through the sky, it carried a crazy whistling sound, and violently shot towards Noah's direction. Seeing this, the corner of Noah's mouth lifted, and a flash of light suddenly flashed in his eyes. The star of heaven and earth's origin, Enuma Elish. The obedient parting sword, EA, which was spinning at an extreme speed, was fiercely stabbed out by Noah. Whing! The red wind pressure condensed into a monstrous red storm, and along the way, it cut open space, and cut open heaven and earth, and brought along a pitch-black spatial fault, to meet the oncoming gray storm. Dong! As if shaking heaven and earth, the roar resounded in every corner. Chapter 14-15. Boom! In the storm, the red storm and the gray storm suddenly collided, causing an earth-shattering roar, setting off an extremely terrifying impact. The red wind pressure and the gray wind pressure turned into countless chaotic airflows, crazily flowing in all directions. Bang 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 bang. Everything that was swept by the wind pressure, no matter if it was trees, rocks, cliffs, or the ground, exploded, turning into fragments that were directly swept into the wind pressure and annihilated into powder. Kacha kacha kacha. In mid-air, the space was like a fragile piece of glass. Under the raging red wind pressure, it cracked and shattered. Whing! Just like that, the pitch-black spatial fault suddenly appeared wherever the red storm passed. It trembled repeatedly and devoured everything that was swept into it, annihilating everything into nothingness. Including the gray storm. Almost at the moment of collision, the gray storm was suddenly entangled by the red storm, and was suddenly pulled into the spatial fault by the red storm, disappearing into the pitch-black spatial crack. What? Susanoo's face was filled with horror. Noya, who was holding the three blades in his hand, continuously spun and released a red wind pressure. He looked at Susanoo's horrified expression and sneered. The controller of the storm. That's not right. The real ability of the noble phantasm was not to control the storm. Instead, it was to form a spatial fault, and then split the world, reproducing the scene of hell before the birth of heaven and earth. So, it should be the creator of hell. After saying that, Noah was like a raging torrent of magical power, pouring it into the noble phantasm. Boom! An even more violent red wind pressure suddenly expanded from the point where the three blades of the Sword of Guile parting, EA, were connected. The wind pressure expanded and turned into a storm that pierced through space. While it tore through the space barrier, it carried along a dark space fault and swept violently towards Susanoo's direction. The pitch-black spatial fault that seemed to have divided the whole sky into two suddenly became like a pitch-black galaxy, crossing the sky and falling on the huge gray storm. The gray storm was directly crushed by the pitch-black spatial fault, turning into a turbulent flow, and was pulled into the spatial fault, disappearing without a trace. Then, the red wind pressure gathered into an even more terrifying storm, and like a red tornado breaking through the sky, it violently shot in the direction of Susanoo. At this moment, in Susanoo's heart, a fatal sense of crisis exploded. The shadow of death suddenly shrouded Susanoo's heart. His pupils shrank to the size of a needle tip. His resolute face was filled with horror and despair. After exhausting all of his divine power, Susanoo could only watch helplessly as the spatial fault that seemed to have divided the sky and the earth into two halves, as if creating a road leading to the underworld, rushed towards him. In his heart, there was even a touch of despair. In such a situation, the red wind pressure still tore the space apart like glass, causing the space fragments to splatter in all directions. On one hand, the red wind pressure divided the sky and the earth into two halves, and on the other hand, the spatial fault that symbolizes the underworld was approaching in the direction of Susanoo. It didn't take long for the spatial fault that divided the sky and the earth into two halves to arrive in front of Susanoo. Susanoo, who has exhausted all of his divine power, could only stare blankly at the spatial fault that filled his entire field of vision, and his whole body was frozen in place, unable to move at all. Just when Susanoo was about to be engulfed by the red wind and annihilated by the spatial fault that divided the sky and the earth, two figures suddenly appeared on both sides of Susanoo, grabbed Susanoo, and then disappeared in place. In the next second, the red wind pressure swept past the spot where Susanoo had been standing. The pitch-black spatial fault also sliced this part of the world in half, and it didn't slow down in the slightest as it flashed past like the Milky Way until it reached the end of the world. Wherever the pitch-black spatial fault passed, the surrounding space would crack open, making the entire sky look like a spider web, filled with cracks. After an unknown amount of time had passed, the red wind pressure that had ripped open the space and created a spatial fault gradually dissipated and slowly disappeared. What was left was the spatial fault that seemed to have divided the entire sky into two halves, spanning across the two ends of the sky, and it didn't calm down for a long time. As for the ground, under the raging wind pressure, it has long been turned into ruins. The original mountain forest and stream had long been completely shattered and disappeared without a trace. When the three spinning blades that were spinning at an extremely fast speed slowly stopped, and the red wind pressure completely disappeared. Noah slowly pulled back the Gwylie sword, that he had thrust out. Looking at the huge, pitch-black spatial rift that stretched across the entire horizon and split the entire sky into two, there was no joy on his face. After being strengthened by the dragon's sovereignty of the sun, Noah's strength has been raised to another level. Using such a terrifying amount of magic to release the power of the Good Separation Sword, to cut open the entire world and achieve the true creation of the heavens and earth, that would not be strange at all. Of course, there is also the reason why this space is only a part of secluded world, and it is not as big as a real world. However, after being strengthened by the dragon's sovereignty of the sun, using the power of the sword to release the power of the sword, it is not strange that it can directly cut an island in half. Then, there is only one question left. In the end, did we still let him escape like this? After saying this, Noah turned around and looked at the corner of the ground that has been turned into ruins. There, three figures suddenly appeared without any warning. Susanoo's knees went soft, and he knelt on the ground, his face full of fear as he violently gasped for breath. Beside him, the princess and the monk's faces were also pale, and their eyes were filled with shock. Just now, if the princess and the monk did not use the special teleportation method of secluded world to save Susanoo in time, at this moment, Susanoo would have disappeared without a trace. Whether it was the dignified and polite princess, the rebellious monk, or the unscrupulous Susanoo, none of them expected this. To think that this battle would end so miserably, announcing their defeat. The highest level god, in the hands of a single god slayer, was reduced to the point where he needed to be saved to survive. It has to be said that this is the most practical way to slap the face of the previous few people who said that it would be difficult to determine the victor. Just like this, under the gaze of the three people, Noah slowly floated down from the sky and landed on a broken rock. With the dark space fault as the background, he looked at Susanoo. "What's wrong?" "Not fighting anymore." Susanoo's face became extremely ugly. The storm god, who is famous for his violent temperament, wants to continue to fight with Noah for 300 more rounds. However, when he glanced at the strange sword in Noah's hand, a trace of fear involuntarily appeared in Susanoo's eyes. To be able to make a god show fear in his eyes, this is simply an unprecedented feat. However, by relying on the most primitive ancient sword and the sun's sovereignty of the sun, Noah has achieved this feat. Not to mention Susanoo, even the rebellious tyrant was speechless. He had a bitter look on his face as if he had eaten Chinese gold thread. Only the princess, who was frightened by Noah's power, breathed a sigh of relief. At least, Noah didn't blame them for saving Susanoo, right? Otherwise, Noah only needed to strike once more, and the three of them would probably not be able to survive. Just when the princess was about to step forward and say something, something strange happened. Boom! In the sky, in the deepest part of the dark space vault, a deafening loud noise resounded. Immediately afterward, a burst of laughter shook the air from inside. Ha 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 ha! I, old sun, am free. Chapter 14-16. Ha 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 ha! I, old sun, am free. When such a burst of laughter rang out from the pitch-black spatial fault that spanned the entire sky and entered the ears of everyone present, everyone was stunned. Immediately, before Noah could react, Susanoo, the monk, and the princess seemed to have thought of something, and their expressions changed. Damn it! The monk shouted with a shocked face. Could it be that the monkey came out? Impossible! Susanoo immediately shook his head. That monkey should be imprisoned by our curse. It's impossible for it to come out without anyone unlocking the curse. The princess also had the same opinion as Susanoo, but then she was slightly surprised. She raised her head and looked at the pitch-black spatial fault that spanned across the sky. She spoke with some uncertainty. Could it be because of the power of Rakshasa King that the Lord God escaped? Only then did Susanoo and the monk react. They both turned their heads and looked at Noah. A god relic that can create spatial faults. Susanoo stared at the Gwaili sword, in Noah's hand and murmured. Could it be, you? What kind of power does your god relic have? The monk pointed to the Gwaili sword, in Noah's hand with a hoarse voice. Could it be that the god relic can really cut open space? What are you still talking about now? Noah frowned. Do you still need me to prove something to you? Hearing this, the three transcendent beings in the hidden world, including the princess, all laughed bitterly. This is really a double whammy. Susanoo raised his head and looked at the pitch-black spatial fault that spanned across the sky again and said in a deep voice. It seems that after the sword cut open this space, its power also spread to another space. And that space happened to be the monkey's cage. The monk was speechless. As a result, the wind pressure that can even cut open space also cut open the curse that bound the monkey. That's the only way. The princess nodded. As for the truth, we only need to investigate a little to find out. After saying that, the princess turned around and bent down gracefully. She scooped up a handful of water from a crack in the messy ground. Her red lips moved slightly as she chanted. Ancient serpent's wisdom, please show me the truth of the other side. The princess splashed the water in her hands in front of her. Immediately, the water that was sprayed out dispersed in mid-air, turning into a cloud of mist. The mist then twisted and converged into a screen. The scene presented on the screen was a magnificent palace like the Forbidden City in China. However, such a palace was forcefully split into two by a pitch-black spatial fault that suddenly appeared. It was as if it had fallen into the earth's crust, collapsing with a loud rumble. In such a collapsed palace, a golden light flashed and flew into the sky. In the distance, a golden cloud flew over from one side of the sky at an astonishing speed. The golden light that soared into the sky blasted into the sky, crossed the golden cloud, and turned into a figure. The figure somersaulted and flipped onto the golden cloud with extreme flexibility. Immediately, the golden cloud carried the figure. Like a stream of light, it wandered in the sky for a while. Finally, it rushed into the pitch-black spatial vault. Oh no! Susanoo cursed out loud. The monkey is coming. The princess and the monk had the same lamenting expression as if it was a blessing and not a curse. They raised their heads and looked at the horizon. Noah frowned. He also raised his head and looked at the huge pitch-black spatial vault across the sky. There, a stream of light suddenly appeared, flew out, and came above Noah's group at an astonishing speed. It seems that there are traces left behind by a battle between young and vigorous men. Well done. It couldn't be better to welcome me, the fighting Buddha, in such a way. Such a voice spread from above the golden cloud. Immediately afterward, Noah saw it. Above the golden cloud, a figure was gradually exposed in the air. Noah was more or less surprised when he saw the full appearance of the figure. Although the figure's body outline was humanoid, it did not have a human appearance. It had a sharp mouth, monkey cheeks, and its entire body was covered in dense golden hair. It had a furry tail behind it, and it was wearing an outfit that looked like something that would only appear in Peking opera, which people would call damn. The pair of eyes were bloodshot. The whites of the eyes were red, and the pupils were golden. It was an ape. The ape that the princess called the god. Of course, that was not the other party's name. It was just a temporary title. The god with the appearance of an ape had a more resounding name. What? Old guys. Why do you all look so miserable? The ape said such a sentence in a curious tone rather than ridicule. When you locked me in the curse, you should be more domineering. How did you become like this now? What's wrong? Monkey? Susanoo stood up with difficulty and stared at the ape standing above the golden cloud. If you are here to seek revenge on us, even if you become like this, I can continue to accompany you. No, no, no. Revenge is something that only mortals do. If you defeat me in a fair battle, then as the fighting Buddha, in order to show my bravery and strength, it is natural for me to seek revenge on you. The ape scratched its furry face and said so. But revenge for such a trivial matter is not something that a well-known existence like me should do. Such a declaration was simply preposterous. No. It should be said that the only people who could treat something like imprisonment as a trivial matter were these gods. Lord God Ape. The princess looked at the ape with quiet eyes. You've finally gotten out too. Yes, the descendant of the snake god. I, old son, can finally see the light of day again. The ape straightened its tall body and spoke loudly. Also, don't call me Lord God Ape. I am not Lord God Ape, but a person who is with the sky. The ape's pair of eyes flashed with a frightening look, making the golden pupils emit a bright brilliance. I am the Monkey King born in the stone, the fierce fighting Buddha. A brilliance suddenly flashed in the ape's hand. The brilliance condensed into a long strip and finally turned into a staff made of steel. Holding the heavy steel staff in his hand, the ape's body surged with amazing curse power. His voice vibrated like a sound wave. My surname is Sun, and my name is Wukong. I call myself the Great Sage, Heaven's Equal. The surging curse power surged from the god named Sun Wukong in all directions like waves, causing the surrounding air to begin to produce a trace of chaos. The earth-shattering name made the expressions of Susanoo, the monk, and the princess become serious. Noah also held the Gwaili sword, in his hand, and a burst of surprise surged in his heart. The Great Sage, Heaven's Equal. It was an existence that didn't even need to be explained. The name of Sun Wukong was more well known than anything in China and Japan, which were close to the east. Why would the ape god, who had once broken into hell and turned the heavenly palace upside down, appear in such a place? Just as Noah was surprised by this, the great sage, heaven's equal, who was standing on a golden cloud in midair, suddenly turned his eyes and looked in the direction of Noah. "Kid over there, you're not an ordinary person. Old son, I can feel the aura of an enemy on you. So that's why. You're the god slayer. You're the one who made the wind god suffer." At this moment, Noah felt it. The great sage, heaven's equal, released his fighting intent towards him. "It was you who helped me get out of trouble, wasn't it? Then, in order to repay you, let me be your opponent." Without Noah's consent, there was no time for him to react. The ape god, who claimed to be the great sage, heaven's equal, looked up to the sky and laughed. Riding the golden cloud called the somersault cloud, he turned into a stream of light and rushed in the direction of Noah at an amazing speed. Whoosh! The steel staff with a strong wind cut through the sky, like a windmill. In the blink of an eye, it was heavily swung toward Noah's head. The inexplicable signal of war made Noah's eyes narrow. Chapter 14:17. Although he didn't know why Great Sage equaling heaven suddenly appeared, according to the dialogue between Susanu, the monk, and the princess, Noah still more or less guessed some reasons. For some reason, Great Sage equaling heaven seemed to be imprisoned in one of the spaces in secluded world by Susanu, the monk, and the princess using some kind of curse. That space was the space where the princess used the curse to show that Great Sage equaling heaven escaped from the palace and was caught by the dark space vault. Due to Noah's use of the good parting sword, the space that Susano occupied was directly cut open by the noble phantasm that could cut open the world. At that time, the wind pressure of the sword of Gwaili, just affected the space where Great Sage equaling heaven was imprisoned. After all, secluded world was a multidimensional world composed of different spaces. The fact that people here could teleport through imagination proved that there was a connection between these isolated spaces. Therefore, Noah used the sword of Gwaili, to cut open this space, which happened to open the way to the space where Great Sage equaling heaven was imprisoned. As a result, the wind pressure of the sword of Gwaili, also cut open the space where Great Sage equaling heaven was imprisoned, and even cut off the curse that imprisoned Great Sage equaling heaven, allowing Great Sage equaling heaven to see the light again. Then, Great Sage equaling heaven came to this space through the space fault caused by the sword of Gwaili, from the space where he was imprisoned. In other words, although he didn't know the specific details, Noah seemed to have coincidentally released the god of disobedience that Susanu, the monk, and the princess imprisoned with great difficulty, allowing the god named Great Sage equaling heaven to appear in this space. Yes. Great Sage equaling heaven was a god of disobedience. He was not a god like Susanu who lived in seclusion and secluded world. Instead, it went against the myths and became a body that went against the Tao. It was a true god of disobedience who was dominated by arrogance. Ha 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 ha. Come on. God Slayer. Look at my staff. With a hearty laugh, Excellency Ape, who was as tall as the sky, stepped on the somersault cloud and rushed to Noah at an amazing speed. He waved his cudgel, which squeezed the air clean and brought a whistling wind. Feeling the violent wind pressure from the attack, Noah quickly raised the discerning sword in his hand. Clang! The sound of steel colliding with steel resounded, stirring up a powerful shockwave that spread in all directions. The terrifying force from Sun Wukong's steel rod smashed into the Gwaili sword, causing Noah's hand to go numb as he let out a groan. That terrifying strength came entirely from the Great Sage, heaven's equal shocking weight, causing Noah to involuntarily click his tongue. So heavy, of course it's heavy. The Great Sage smiled proudly. The Rui Jingu Bang of the Great Sage, heaven's equal is made of divine iron. It is a divine needle that can even calm the sea. It weighs 13,500 kilograms. With this iron rod, I have swept the underworld, modified the book of life and death, and disturbed the heavenly court. I have beaten 100,000 celestial soldiers and celestial generals. Therefore, God Slayer, you should be proud to be able to take Sun Wukong's cudgel. After saying that, the great sage, heaven's equal, once again raised the Jingu Bang in his hand high above his head and waved it mercilessly at Noah with the force of splitting the earth. With just a wave, the atmosphere was directly torn apart by the simple steel rod, setting off a violent airflow. As the Jingu Bang waved down, everything was squeezed clean. Just like in the legends. Sun Wukong's Jingu Bang had an extremely amazing weight. Even Noah, who had used magic to strengthen his arm strength and the LV5 ability value, felt that it was difficult to handle. He did not choose to take it and quickly retreated. Bang! The golden hooped cudgel, which did not lose its momentum, landed directly on the ground. The ground, which was already in ruins, suddenly exploded. It was as if it had been hit by a meteorite. It sank layer by layer until it turned into a crater with a diameter of hundreds of meters before it stopped. Don't run. God Slayer. The great sage, heaven's equal's monkey face was full of joy. Riding the somersault cloud, he turned into a streamer and rushed in the direction of Noah. After a while, he caught up with Noah, who was retreating, and waved his cudgel again. Noah only felt that his vision was blurred. Sun Wukong, who was riding the somersault cloud, flashed in front of him and waved the heavy iron rod at his head. Not only was his strength amazing, but his speed was also terrifying. However, that was to be expected. In Journey to the West, the great sage, heaven's equal, Sun Wukong, had 5 most outstanding strengths. First, he held the Rui Jingu Bang, which weighed 13,500 kilograms. Second, he had an indestructible body, which was comparable to King Kong and was extremely hard. Third, he could summon the somersault cloud, which could fly 108,000 miles with a somersault. Fourth, he had 72 transformations, which was all-encompassing and ever-changing. 5. The fiery eyes of gold that can identify any demons and ghosts, and see through any illusions. The first strength gave Sun Wukong a terrifying attack power. The second strength gave Sun Wukong a terrifying immortal body. The third strength gave Sun Wukong a terrifying speed and agility. Together with the fourth and fifth strength, this excellency ape almost had no weakness. The speed that Sun Wukong showed on the somersault cloud was the so-called God speed. Noah, who also had the God speed authority, naturally understood how illegal this authority was. Without the mind-eye skill, it was simply an incomprehensible power. Fortunately, although Noah did not have the mind-eye skill, he had superb sensing ability. Therefore, when Sun Wukong retreated from the God speed world and waved an amazing blow at him, Noah reacted in time. Blow him away. Guile sword, EA. The dark black rotating blade, which was covered by red lines, suddenly began to rotate, causing red wind pressure to surge out. It was like a whirlpool that began to rotate wildly. Bang! Like a wild whip, one of the red wind pressure, which was spinning wildly like a whirlpool, swept heavily on the chest of the Monkey King, who was about to swing the rod down, causing a heavy muffled sound. The great sage, heaven's equal, let out a muffled groan as he was sent flying. He landed heavily on the ground, creating a deep pit. Ouch! It hurts. Excellency Ape, who was riding on the somersault cloud, covered his chest and made a strange cry. God Slayer, did you break my invincible Vidra body so easily? Taking a closer look, Sun Wukong, who was swept by the wind pressure of the Guile sword, EA, because of his careless attack, had a hideous wound full of blood on his chest. It was as if it was going to cut him diagonally, from his shoulder to the side of his waist. Although Sun Wukong did not use his full strength, he was swept by the wind pressure that could cut the world. Even the immortal body, which was known as the indestructible body, was easily broken. Oh, no, I was careless. The Monkey King seemed to have finally calmed down. Because I was too happy to escape, I didn't consider my condition and rushed over excitedly. In the end, I was seriously injured. It's really embarrassing. Fine, I'll retreat here first. After I recover from my injuries and recover my divine power, I'll come and fight you again. After that, the Monkey King rode on the somersault cloud, turned into a golden light, and flew toward the dark space vault above the sky. God Slayer. We will meet again someday. With that, the great sage, Heaven's equal, disappeared into the pitch-black spatial vault along with the golden light. What's going on? Noah looked at this scene, almost stunned. Come and go as you please. Fight as you please and escape as you please. Do you have to be so shameless? From the very beginning, Noah was in a state of confusion when the great sage, Heaven's equal, found fault with him. Then, he inexplicably received the other party's attack. When Sun Wukong was careless, the Monkey King used the wind pressure of the Guile sword, EA, to sweep him, and then the Monkey King fled again. Such willful and reckless behavior was like a typhoon, and Noah could not help but feel a little confused. However, Noah understood again. This was the mischievous Excellency Ape who had once made a scene in the heavenly palace and overturned the underworld. In any case, Noah had to admit a fact. I've been targeted by an incredible god. Sui Xiong murmured. Chapter 14:18. It wasn't until the great sage equaling heaven disappeared into the dark spatial vault that Susanoo, the monk, and the princess looked at each other. It seems that Monkey King should have returned to the real world. Princess said with some worry. This time, the people on the ground will have to suffer a great disaster again. The appearance of the god of disobedience would bring great disaster to the world on the ground. Monkey King, was the god of war with boundless magical power. If he became a god of disobedience and allowed himself to be manipulated by arrogance, ordinary humans could only suffer. That was also a matter of course. Princess was probably worried about this, right? The kindness of worrying about the country and the people obviously came from her heart. Compared with the kind-hearted princess, Susanoo and the tyrant were quite irresponsible. They said such words as if they didn't have a care in the world. Even so, don't humans have a saying that only by experiencing hardships can one stand out? Even if it causes a disaster, it's just a small matter. With the appearance of a disobedient god, the god's layers will naturally be attracted like sharks that have smelled blood. That monkey will be dealt with sooner or later, won't it? Hearing the heartless words of Susanoo and Monk, Noah frowned tightly and looked coldly at the two guys who he didn't have a good impression of at all. You are the ones who imprisoned Excellency Ape. Now that he has escaped and returned to the real world, he will definitely turn the world upside down after he recovers from his injury. It is not surprising even if there are heavy casualties. Only you guys who don't take human life seriously can sleep soundly, right? No, even if you say so, we have done everything we should do. Susanoo said without a trace of worry and guilt. What's more, although the curse of imprisoning the monkey was completed by us, the ones who really benefited were you humans. Now that something has happened, you want to push the blame to us. How can there be such a good thing? We humans are the ones who benefited? Noah's frown deepened. What the hell is going on? Hearing Noah's blunt questioning, which was almost in the form of an order, the rebellious monk immediately wanted to mock him. However, before that, Noah glanced at the monk and said indifferently. You'd better not say anything I don't like to hear. Otherwise, I don't mind giving you another stab. After saying that, Noah gently raised the Guile sword, EA, in his hand. The red wind pressure that lingered around the sword carried an aura that made one's heart palpitate, causing the monk's shriveled face to twitch slightly. He could only swallow the sarcasm that was about to come out of his mouth. At this point, no matter how rebellious the monk was, he finally understood one thing. That was, it would not benefit him at all if he spoke too fast. These transcendental beings were not ordinary humans, nor were they ordinary god-slayers. Instead, it could use all kinds of god relics that only existed in myths and legends. It could even open up heaven and earth. It could even cut open the curse binding the god of disobedience. In addition, the other party was not in existence that would swallow insult and humiliation. He would do whatever he wanted. If he continued to provoke him, perhaps the next time he would be the one to face the world-splitting sword strike, he would be the one to face it. Even the monk, who had become a Buddha physically, would no longer have any sense of superiority at this time. The god-slayer in front of them must not be provoked. This was the monk's truest feeling now. Similarly, it was Susanu's feeling. Under such circumstances, even Susanu seemed to have swallowed his bitterness. He closed his mouth tightly, for fear that if he spoke rudely again, he would really be killed by Noah's sword. Only the princess took a step forward and whispered to Noah softly. "The great sage is actually steel that we summoned to slay the dragon and snake." Steel. Noah sighed aloud. Sure enough, Sun Wukong is also steel. In Journey to the West, Sun Wukong, the great sage equaling heaven, was a monkey that jumped out of a stone. After learning the magical powers of heaven and earth, he caused havoc in the heavenly palace and was imprisoned in Taishang Laojuan's 8 trigrams furnace. However, after being calcined by the furnace fire, he obtained an indestructible body and fiery golden eyes. All of these myths were closely related to steel. If Sun Wukong, the stone monkey, was regarded as the stone itself, that is, the ore itself, after being calcined by the furnace fire, he obtained a steel-like body when he came out. Wasn't that the process of forming a sharp weapon of steel, which was the forging process of a sword? The so-called steel god referred to the gods who slayed dragons and killed snakes and held weapons made of steel in their hands. Their existence itself was like a living sword. There was a legend that was completely consistent with the forging process of the sword, which was the best proof that the great sage equaling heaven was steel. Moreover, in Journey to the West, Sun Wukong subdued the dragon and turned it into the Mount of Tang Sing on the way to the Buddhist scriptures, which was the legend of the dragon horse. The story of breaking into the dragon palace and taking away the Rui Jingu Bang proved that this excellency ape had a deep relationship with the dragon and snake. In this way, the great sage equaling heaven was naturally the steel god, who slayed dragons and snakes. In order to eliminate the dragon and snake that appeared in Japan, Susanu, the monk, and the princess worked together to summon the great sage equaling heaven and then imprison this excellency ape with a great spell. As long as a dragon and snake, the mythological beast of the dragon and snake, and the goddess of the earth, who symbolized the dragon and snake, appeared in Japan, the 3 of them would undo this spell and let the great sage equaling heaven go to slay the dragon and snake. Of course, after completing the task, the curse would reseal the great sage equaling heaven. Unfortunately, now, this curse had been directly cut off by Noah with the Genesis divine sword, and it could no longer be restored. In addition to the purpose of slaying the dragon and killing the snake, we have also established a connection to the space where the great sage is imprisoned in the island country on the ground. The great sage's ancestral temple is protected by a strong barrier and a sealing spell. If there is a witch who can use a spell to weaken the seal, then we can use the power of the great sage, heaven's equal to heaven to a certain extent. The princess tried her best to explain to Noah. In this case, the humans on the ground can more or less gain some benefits. So, Susanu said that it was the humans who benefited? It's just that you didn't specifically imprison a disobedient god for the sake of humans, right? Noah looked directly at the princess. After all, the power that the great sage equaling heaven can lend to humans, you transcendental existences can do the same, right? You are right, the foreign Rakshasa king. The princess smiled bitterly. Our main purpose is to slaughter the dragon and snake that appeared in the island country. Why did you specifically summon the god of steel, who slays dragons and snakes, to eliminate the dragon and snake that appeared in the island country? Noah directly approached the main topic. It has something to do with the strongest steel that you have been very concerned about, right? Yes. The princess closed her eyes. Dragons and serpents can stimulate steel. Sometimes they awaken steel from its slumber, and sometimes they bestow steel with power. In order to prevent steel from waking up from its slumber, we summon the gods who can slay dragons and serpents. Just like Perseus in Naples, he appeared because of the appearance of the dragon beast, proving that the dragon and snake could awaken the sleeping steel. After Susanoo annihilated Orochi, he obtained the Kusanagi sword from its tail, which also proved that the dragon and snake could give steel the power. In order to prevent the strongest steel from waking up from his slumber in the island nation, these three transcendent existences had done so many things. That lord is the last king to appear in the world, known as the last king. At the same time, he is also the strongest steel. He can annihilate the demon king and become the natural enemy of the god slayer. The princess said quietly. Letting that lord wake up again will not do much good to the world. We unanimously decided to let that lord continue to sleep. But this is also a very risky approach, Noah said calmly. The monkey has now broken away from your curse and returned to its disobedient body. What are you going to do? Fortunately, the king who can rival the great sage is also on this island country. The princess looked at Noah with great sincerity. The foreign Rakshasa king, please stop the great sage. Sure enough, things have turned out like this. Chapter 14:19. Rumble. In one of the spaces in Ushur, the forbidden city-like palace that originally imprisoned the great sage, heaven's equal was still collapsing like the sky was falling and the earth was cracking. The dark space fault that split the entire palace into two halves was directly imprinted on the ground, making the palace seem to fall into a swamp. It slowly disintegrated and collapsed, turned into rubble, and was gradually swallowed up. If this continued, it was only a matter of time before the palace was completely destroyed. However, this palace was originally used to imprison the curse of the great sage, heaven's equal. Now that the great sage, heaven's equal had escaped, this palace was no longer useful. It might not be a bad thing for him to retreat after accomplishing his mission here. In the dark space vault, at a certain moment, a stream of light flew out from it like a meteor, crossing the sky and stopping in mid-air, revealing its full appearance. It was none other than Noah. Looking around and watching the palace that was gradually swallowed up by the dark space vault, Noah muttered to himself. Is this the space that imprisoned Sun Wukong? Where is the exit? According to the princess, the space used to imprison Sun Wukong was separated from the rest of the space in Ushur by a powerful enchantment and sealing curse. There was no way to reach it by teleportation. Therefore, after the great sage, heaven's equal escaped, he used the space vault opened by the good parting sword, EA, to move to the space where Susanoo was located. Noah also used the same method to come to this space. He came here mainly because although this space was separated from the rest of the space in Ushur, there was an exit that connected to the Shinjun temple used to worship the great sage, heaven's equal. The people in this world used this exit to let Witch Yuan, who could use the curse to weaken the curse, open a hole in the enchantment and seal. She entered here and communicated with the imprisoned great sage, heaven's equal, so as to borrow the power of the great sage, heaven's equal. Then, whenever dragons and snakes appeared on the ground, the great sage, heaven's equal, who had been unbound by the curse, would also go to the world through this exit. He would kill the dragons and snakes, complete the mission, and then be brought back by the curse through this exit to be sealed again. Therefore, using this exit, Noah and the great sage, heaven's equal, could return to the modern realm. Don't think that just because Susanu had casually pulled Noah into secluded world, he would be able to let anyone enter and leave as they pleased. If one did not use some special method, the door between the hidden world and the present world would not open. The reason why Susanu was able to bring Noah here was mainly because of his witch and god relic in this world. With the help of the witch, the god who had stolen the sun could also bring Noah from the ground to the secluded world. Now, there is no medium on the ground that Susanu can use, so he has no way to send Noah back to the modern world. As for the monk, he was not proficient in this aspect at all. The princess was a god ancestor, so she knew how to enter and exit the hidden world. However, they also lacked the necessary tools for the ceremony, so the princess was at her wit's end. Therefore, Noah could only return to the modern world like the great sage, heaven's equal, through this exit. After looking around, Noah finally saw it. In front of the palace, there was a distorted space. It was as clear as water. That's the exit, right? Noah stared at the space in front of him. It seems that Sun Wukong has opened the exit and returned to the modern realm. I hope he won't act recklessly in his injured state. As soon as Noah finished speaking, a dazzling light flashed in the pocket of his coat just as he was about to fly into the space. Seeing this, Noah could not help but be stunned. Then, he remembered something and quickly took out something from the pocket of his coat. It was 3 pieces of jade in the shape of Magatama. The 3 pieces of Magatama that were shining with a dazzling red light trembled slightly. Then, they gradually became distorted in the light. Not long after, the 3 pieces of Magatama turned into 3 figures and fell to the ground. Noah immediately stretched out his hands and hugged 2 of the figures in his arms. The other figure fell directly to the ground. With a bang, it landed hard on the ground. It hurts. A scream immediately sounded. Ugh! The other 2 figures in Noah's arms let out a soft moan. Their eyelids fluttered a few times and then they opened their eyes. With the 2 girls in his arms, Noah slowly descended from the sky and landed on the ground. He was like a frog, lying on the ground in front of the 2 people. He slightly shook the 2 girls in his arms. Are you okay? Hearing this, the 2 young girls covered their heads and said in a daze. What happened to me? I feel so uncomfortable. Of course, the 2 girls only felt a little uncomfortable. The young man who fell heavily on the ground was a little miserable. He held his waist and struggled to get up with a pale face. My waist. The 3 people were the ones who had been turned into Magatama and entered the secluded world with Noah. They were Wanli Gu Yoli, Qingqiu Courtyard Cui Na, and Gon Chi Dong Ma. Because humans had no way of adapting to the secluded world, the princess turned them into Magatama to prevent them from losing their lives. Now that the 3 of them were in this space, the transformation technique was undone. After all, this space was not only separated from the secluded world. In order to allow the witches who served the great sage, heavens equal to heaven, to enter and leave freely, this space was also enchanted to allow humans to adapt to the secluded world. Therefore, the transformation technique of the 3 was undone. Gon Chi Dong Ma, who was holding his waist, grimaced as he instinctively observed his surroundings. Where is this? Wanli Gu Yoli and Qingqiu Courtyard Cui Na also regained their senses and looked around. Seeing that the 3 of them had returned to their original state, Noah directly spoke. It's a long story. In short, let's leave the secluded world and return to the modern world first. Secluded world. Wanli Gu Yoli and Qingqiu Courtyard Cui Na looked at Noah in surprise. This is the secluded world. That's right. Noah nodded. I will explain it to you slowly on the way. Let's go out first. Wanli Gu Yoli, Qingqiu Courtyard Cui Na, and Gon Chi-dong-ma looked at each other, then nodded. After entering the distorted space, everything around them became extremely dark, leaving only a path that was emitting light, connecting them to the front where they couldn't see the end. Noah, Wanli Gu Yoli, Qingshou Courtyards Hui Naa, and Gon Chi-dong-ma ran forward at a speed beyond what ordinary humans should have. However, Wanli Gu Yoli, whose physical strength was weaker than the average person, couldn't have such leg strength. He was now being carried by Qingshou Courtyards Hui Naa. Under such circumstances, Noah briefly explained the current situation to the three of them. The curse of the great sage, heaven's equal, is broken. Gon Chi-dong-ma was slightly surprised, then he had a headache. This is troublesome. Not only Gon Chi-dong-ma, but even Wanli Gu Yoli and Qingshou Courtyards Hui Na were surprised. This made Noah a little surprised. Why? Do you all know that the great sage, heaven's equal, is imprisoned? As long as you are a person in the industry, you will know more or less. Gon Chi-dong-ma explained. King also knows about the 4 major families in Japan's cursed world, right? Among the 4 major families, the Juyoshi Mizuka family enshrines Lord Ape in Nikko's West Heaven Palace. It is not an ordinary enshrine, but a deity who was originally the god of disobedience is sealed there. The Juyoshi Mizuka family has been borrowing the power of this deity for many years. However, Lord Ape in the West Heaven Palace is sealed with a great curse. If you want to borrow the power of the deity, you must have Witch Yuan, who can weaken the seal, to enshrine. Otherwise, there is no way to borrow the power of the deity. Hui Na continued Gon Chi-dong-ma's words. Hui Na heard that Witch Yuan, who has this kind of talent, has not appeared again in the past 100 years. Therefore, the Juyoshi Mizuka family has not received the help of the deity's power for nearly 100 years. As a result, today, the curse that sealed Lord Ape was split open by obedient parting sword, EA, allowing the great sage, heaven's equal, to freedom. During the conversation, a light like a cave entrance appeared in front of them. Seeing the light, Noah and his party quickly quickened their pace and rushed into the light. The next moment, the darkness faded, allowing the sunlight to enter the vision of Noah and his party. However, other than the sunlight, there was also a scene that could only be described as unbearable to look at, imprinted in everyone's eyes. It was a dilapidated ruin. Chapter 14:20. Small pieces of debris and pebbles were rolling on the ground, or falling from the piles of ruins, stirring up waves of soft noises. A cool breeze blew through the ruins, stirring up thick sand and dust, making the air a little turbid. The scene imprinted in the eyes of Noah and the others made their faces freeze. Compared to the forbidden city-like palace in the space where the great sage, heaven's equal, was imprisoned, this was a magnificent temple that was not the slightest bit inferior. However, at this moment, everything in the temple seemed to have been ravaged by a strong earthquake, turning into a tragic ruin. The surrounding trees fell in a radial pattern in all directions. The building seemed to have collapsed, turning into piles of rubble. One could faintly see people dressed as clergymen lying on the ground, or directly buried in the rubble, their bodies covered in dust. That scene was simply like the scene of a disaster, making people feel suffocated. Wanli Gu Yoli had already covered her small mouth with her hand, turning her head away as if she could not bear to look directly. This is too much. Hui Na, the careless wild child, could not help but whisper. It seems that when the great sage left the Western Heaven Palace, he wreaked havoc, and then left. This was indeed something that the monkey would do. He must have thought that even if he retreated, he would retreat in a grand and open manner. After blowing away the entire Western Heaven Palace, he would then leave on the somersault cloud. Anyway, with the different values of those gods and humans, they would certainly not carry out such atrocities with the idea of destroying the prison where they had been imprisoned for many years with resentment. That was why those so-called disobedient gods were so detestable. It was estimated that even Athena, who had a very deep relationship with Noah, would not care about the lives of mere humans. If necessary, she would not mind making a river of blood, right? Because these gods who appeared on the ground were all disobedient gods who had long been swallowed up by the unique arrogance of the disobedient gods, they would only wreak havoc on the ground without mercy. Noah closed his eyes and fully unfolded his sensing ability. After sensing the aura of the scene, he opened his eyes again. The people here still have aura on them. They are not dead yet. Hurry up and arrange for rescue to rescue them from the ruins. Otherwise, they will really lose their lives. Hearing Noah's words, Wanli Gu Yoli breathed a sigh of relief, and then hurriedly said to Ganji Winterhorse, who was beside him. Mr. Ganji, please hurry up and arrange for rescue. It's already done. Ganji Winterhorse took out his mobile phone and dialed a number. I will report the situation to the higher-ups and arrange for rescue. I will also send people to search for the whereabouts of the great sage, Heaven's Equal. I hope that we can find him while he is seriously injured. It would be best if there are other places like this. After leaving such ominous words, Ganji Winterhorse took his mobile phone and went to the side to make arrangements. King. Hui Na looked at Noah. What should we do? Wanli Gu Yoli also turned his gaze to Noah, his face full of worry and nervousness. Noah couldn't help but smile bitterly. What should we do? What else can we do? Do you have a way to fight against that monkey here? It's impossible, right? Even if it's Hui Na, it's the same. Hui Na said directly. Sure enough, we can only ask the king. Mr. Noah. Wanli Gu Yoli obviously had the same idea, so he mustered up his courage and said to Noah. Can we ask you to help us deal with the great sage? You don't need to ask, I will do it. Noah laughed, then looked at the ruins in front of him and said softly. After all, this is an agreement, and also my responsibility. The agreement refers to the agreement with the History Compilation Committee. The History Compilation Committee provides Noah with an attendant who is responsible for solving secular affairs. During this period, if the god of disobedience appears in Japan, then Noah will deal with it. Now, it is time to implement this agreement. As for the responsibility, it refers to Noah's personal responsibility. After all, although it was unintentional, the person who released the great sage, Heaven's Equal, was Noah, wasn't it? Since this is the case, Noah naturally has to bear this responsibility and send the monkey back to the Western Paradise, so that it will not come out again to harm people. Although Noah is still adapting to the current authority, it will take about 3 more days for him to use it. However, the current Noah is no longer an ignorant person. Even if he doesn't use the authority, he still has the ability to face the highest level of the god of disobedience alone. The battle with Susanoo just proved this point. So, don't let me find you, stinky monkey. Unfortunately, Noah doesn't know. The impact of the reappearance of Sun Wukong is not limited to this island country. In the Brittany region of France, in a forest, a young girl who looks to be only 12 or 13 years old, but is wearing a pitch-black dress and exuding a noble temperament, stood by a lake, as if praying, and spoke to the lake. Uncle, a new steel has appeared in the island country at the end of the east. The girl's words seemed to turn into ripples, causing the lake to begin to fluctuate. Not long after, on the lake, the image of a knight wearing white armor emerged from the lake. My beloved daughter, Guinevere, will the steel that has appeared this time be the king that we are searching for? I'm not sure. Using steel as an example, it seems to be a god with other complicated attributes, and is not the most orthodox and pure steel god like Uncle. Guinevere closed her eyes, still in a praying position. However, Guinevere and Uncle have been searching for Master all these years, but we have not set foot on the island country at the end of the east. Now that steel has suddenly appeared in that island country, Guinevere thinks that there must be a reason. That is to say, this is your intuition. The god named Lancelot said in a heavy voice. Since it is your intuition as the Queen of Witches, then the possibility is very high. Unfortunately, it did not trigger spirit vision, just some inspiration. Guinevere opened her eyes and looked at Lancelot in the lake. So, uncle, I plan to set off and go to the island country at the end of the east to investigate. Let's do as you say. Lancelot did not have any objections. However, don't forget, we were defeated by the young god Slayer once, and even the Holy Grail was taken away. This time, we can't be careless. A trace of hatred and fear appeared in Guinevere's eyes, and she nodded heavily. At the same time, in London, England, in a luxurious mansion. Enjoying the title of princess, the girl who was known as the most outstanding lady in Europe was walking in the courtyard, bathing in the sun while talking to herself comfortably. It's so good to be able to walk freely. Because of her special talent, the girl's body had always been very weak. In recent years, she could only lie in bed and could no longer get up. She could only rely on the method of creating doppelgangers to move around in the sun. However, a month ago, the girl got rid of that life and her body recovered. This is all thanks to the king. The girl pursed her lips and smiled elegantly. At the same time, she thought of the method that the king helped her recover. Her pretty face flushed slightly, and her small hand pressed on her lips, looking like a young girl in love. He is so tough. I really want to complain to him. Just as she finished speaking, the young lady seemed to have suddenly sensed something. She stopped in her tracks and smiled sweetly. Hiding in the dark and peeping on ladies. That's a pretty good hobby, isn't it? This sentence was immediately rebutted by a displeased voice. Undoubtedly, the guy who is best at peeping. What are you talking about? As the voice sounded, a bolt of lightning suddenly appeared in the courtyard. The lightning gradually turned into a bolt of lightning, and then into a figure that entered the girl's eyes. The girl who was familiar with the enemy in front of her knew what kind of power this was. It was the power called Lightning Spark. The person who came was Yerek. Chapter 14:21. Seeing Yerek suddenly appear in front of her, Alice sighed faintly as if she was worried about a friend. When will the person known as the prince get rid of the habit of breaking into other people's homes? This was not the first time Yerek had broken into Alice's home without permission. With the seraphic authority, there was almost no place that the Black Prince could not go without being discovered by anyone. That was why the Black Prince was secretly known as the most powerful monster thief in history. Ever since Yerek became enemies with her, he had broken into Alice's home without permission more than once. Fortunately, Alice had an ability called mental telepathy. This ability allowed her to eliminate distracting thoughts and focus her mind. She could slightly detect other people's aura, feelings, and even what they were thinking. She could then interfere with the source of the spirit, which was the so-called spiritual body and soul, and then manipulate them with dexterity. This was a special ability that only a very small number of witches and witches could use. Alice might not be able to read the mind of the God Slayer with this ability, but she could still sense the aura of the God Slayer by releasing her mental power. Therefore, even if Yerek broke into Alice's home, she could still clearly sense his arrival. That was why Yerek called her the best at peeping. Through the use of mental telepathy, Alice could clearly sense everything that was happening in other places, just like Noah's telepathy. The difference was that Noah could only sense hostility, malice, murderous intent, aura, or some other abnormalities. Alice, on the other hand, could completely detect everything that was happening in the place she sensed. It was as if she had seen and heard it in person. There would be no deviation. This way, Alice could more or less fight against Yerek. After all, the Black Prince Yerek was a political enemy of the Wise Men's Parliament. If she fought against the God Slayer with force, she would lose in the end, no matter what the process was. As the God Slayer, Yerek could easily destroy the wise men's parliament if he wanted to. Therefore, to fight against Yerek, she needed to use politics, negotiation, strategy, negotiation, economy, and so on. She could not just use force. Otherwise, they would definitely suffer a crushing defeat. It was because of this that Alice was able to defeat the Godslayer many times with the help of Paul Brantley, the commander of the Black Cross, Erica's uncle, who had the highest title of Paladin among humans and was comparable to god beasts and god ancestors. As for him breaking into her house without permission every time, Alice just let him be. In any case, there was no way he could fight against Yerek by force alone. In that case, it would be better to be more magnanimous and allow the other party to enter and leave freely. This way, Alice would be able to show her calmness in the political confrontation and gain a certain advantage. Now, Alice was targeting Yerek for trespassing on private property and verbally attacking him. In this regard, Yerek only gave a sarcastic remark. Since that's the case, let's set up some defenses. If the princess doesn't have any guards around her, wouldn't that be very degrading? As he said this, Yerek's gaze swept over Alice's body and narrowed his eyes. Besides, you're actually using your real body today, and you look very healthy. Have you finally found a way to get rid of your illness? You're still as outspoken as before, Alice said with an elegant smile. I just got a little help from a wise king. A wise king. Yerek's eyes flickered slightly as he stared at Alice closely. Among today's god slayers, almost every one of them is a battle maniac who only causes trouble. As far as I know, there is only one person who can be called wise. Oh. Alice was a little surprised. How rare, Alexander. You actually admit that there is a wise person among the god slayers other than yourself. I'm just stating facts. Compared to the others, that guy's brain is indeed better. Yerek looked directly at Alice. You, on the other hand, may be called a princess, but only I know how bad your personality is. In your opinion, the other god slayers are probably just walking catastrophes. You actually think that one of them is wise. It's going to rain in England tomorrow. Can I take it that you're just jealous? Alice was not provoked by Yerek's provocation. She pursed her lips and smiled. At least, in my opinion, that lord is indeed much wiser than you god slayers. Don't lump me in with the rest of them, Yerek finally blurted out. I'm not brainless like those guys who only think about solving things with their fists all day long. But if you can solve things with your fists, surely you wouldn't mind doing so. Alice poked at Yerek's sore spot. Then what's the difference between you and the other god slayers? Then what about the king you think is wise? Yerek said sarcastically. If I remember correctly, when he first came out, he fought with the Italian idiot one-on-one and caused a loss of 15 billion euros. Later, in order to defeat the homeless old man and the powerful woman from China, he caused great damage. Can that be called wise? You're looking at things from the wrong point of view, Alexander, Alice immediately retorted. That lord has been a god slayer for almost half a year, but he has only caused this level of damage in half a year. In the past month, he hasn't caused any commotion. Compared to you people who fight to the death with the gods every few days, how wise is he? Well. Yerek was suddenly speechless and said angrily. I didn't expect that you, who have never sided with any of the god slayers, would speak for him like this. Don't tell me you like him. WH. What? Alice's elegant demeanor instantly disappeared without a trace. Her pretty face turned red as she stood up in anger. It's not gentlemanly to casually fabricate a relationship between a lady and the opposite sex. Alexander, don't you have any manners? I just said it casually. I didn't expect you to have such a big reaction. Yerek's mouth twitched, and a rare expression of interest appeared on his face. Don't tell me that the person who is called a princess in Europe has finally fallen in love with someone. When did you become such a gossipy person? Why didn't I know that you have such a cute curiosity? Alice blushed and stared at Yerek. You didn't come to me just to talk about this, did you? What's the matter? Humph. Yerek snorted, but still got to the point. I received news that the god ancestor has left Britta, and his whereabouts are unknown. God ancestor. Lord Guinevere. Alice calmed down and asked in surprise. Why? Who knows? Yerek said directly. It's precisely because I want to know her whereabouts that I came to find you. In terms of collecting information, the Sage Parliament, which Alice belonged to, was undoubtedly more suitable than Yerek's royal factory. Princess Alice, who had the best spiritual vision and spiritual perception in Europe, was also more suitable than Yerek to do this kind of thing. That god ancestor is our common enemy, Yerek said meaningfully. I think, in this regard, you won't mind working with me, right? That is to say, you provide information about the enemy's departure, and I provide information about the enemy's location. Alice sighed. You're still the same as before. You're better than anyone else. Having said that, Alice started to laugh happily. Well, I haven't used my real body to travel for a long time. This time, I'll use my real body to work. Hearing that, Yerek knew what to do. It was a done deal. In addition to Guinevere, Lancelot, Yerek, Alice, and the others, there was one more person who also took action. Soon, these people would meet Noah, who was in the center of the chaos, and cause a big commotion. Chapter 14:22. While the rest of the people from all sides were mobilized because of the appearance of the great sage, Noah, Huina, and Yoli stayed in a hotel under the arrangement of Gans Han Dong Ma. More than 10 hours had passed since the great sage, Heaven's equal, had escaped. It was now nighttime. After Gans Han Dong Ma reported that the great sage had escaped, only about 30 minutes later, people from the History Compilation Committee came to the Western Heaven Palace, sealed off the scene, and began their work. Because the History Compilation Committee was an official organization, even the police force was mobilized. Therefore, a large number of police cars were now surrounding the Western Heaven Palace. They had cordoned off the entire area around the Western Heaven Palace, making it look like a murder scene. There were also a large number of police officers in uniform stationed there. The security was very tight. Of course, no matter how tight the security was, it was only for ordinary people. For those magicians and conjurers who had mastered mysterious powers, breaking through such a scene was just a piece of cake. For this reason, almost half of these police officers were conjurers in disguise. In addition, there were a large number of secret personnel hiding around to keep watch. A large number of staff members also poured into the Western Heaven Palace to treat the people who had been killed. Should it be said that it was a blessing in disguise? Sun Wukong blew the entire Western Heaven Palace away. It seemed that it was really just for show, and he did not care about the survival of human beings. Because of this, the great sage, Heaven's equal, would naturally not go after the humans. After blowing away the people in the Western Heaven Palace along with the buildings, he retreated on his own. Since the great sage only targeted the buildings and did not target the people in the Western Heaven Palace, although some of the people who had been killed were seriously injured, none of them really died and were rescued in time. In other words, the farce of the great sage was only targeted at a group of buildings. Apart from causing a lot of damage, there were no deaths or injuries. This was undoubtedly good news. Therefore, the rescue operation almost did not encounter many difficulties. It only took about 4 or 5 hours for all the people who had been killed to be rescued. Then, the History Compilation Committee began to mobilize people to investigate the whereabouts of the great sage. However, it was not known whether it was a blessing or a misfortune. Until now, there was still no trace of the great sage, heaven's equal. This also meant that other than the Western Heaven Palace, there were no other places that were affected. That was why he didn't know if this news was a blessing or a misfortune. In short, the official history compilation committee took on the task of finding the missing person. Noah only needed to wait for the official history compilation committee to find the whereabouts of the great sage, heaven's equal, before taking down the monkey. Thus, Noah brought the two witches and stayed in a hotel arranged by Winterhorse Ganjin. In the hotel, Noah was thinking about how to deal with Sun Wukong while telling Yuri and Hui Na the details of the great sage equaling heaven's escape. After listening to the whole process in detail, the two witches were stunned. So, the person who released the great saint is the king. Hui's face was full of shock and admiration. Furthermore, it was because he accidentally released the great sage because of a fight with Grandpa. The king is truly amazing. Mr. Noah. Yoli was a little angry. How can you be so impulsive? What do you mean by impulsive? Do you want me to silently bear the provocation of those two useless gods and Buddhas? Noah retorted. I'm sorry, I can't do it. Those two guys are too annoying. I didn't finish them off at the end and send them to the real Western paradise. I'm already giving them a lot of face. Well, Grandpa is really annoying sometimes. Although Hui Na has no memory of being angered, Mr. Ganjin and others often have headaches because of Grandpa's willfulness. Hui Na said generously. On the contrary, the king can actually split the curse that imprisoned the great sage with a sword. Hui Na is impressed. What's wrong? Noah asked curiously. Is that curse difficult to break? It's not difficult to break, but super difficult to break, Hui Na explained. Hui Na heard that if you want to break the curse that imprisoned the great sage, heaven's equal, you must meet 3 conditions. The first condition is to make the dragon snake's divinity appear, Hui Na said. Because the great sage is the god of steel, the sword god born to conquer the dragon snake. Therefore, the dragon snake's blood and divine power can stimulate his power and remind him of his tyrannical nature. The second condition is to have a treasured sword with a weakened seal, Hui Na said with assurance. It is said that if you want to break the curse of Lord Ape and borrow the power of Lord Ape, you have to let Witch Yuan, who can weaken the seal, worship him. Witch Yuan's power alone is not enough. She needs to cooperate with the treasured sword that also has the power to weaken the seal. The treasured sword is kept by the Jiufa Zhong family. And the third condition is to let Witch Yuan, who has the ability of a calamity, hold the treasured sword and use her spiritual power to cut the seal, Hui Na said to Noah. That's the ability to erase or restore the power of curses, spells, magic, and other mysterious things that shouldn't exist in this world. However, it has very little effect on the power of the god and the god slayer. Witch Yuan, who can worship the god lord, must have this ability to use the treasured blade, weaken the seal, and borrow the power of the god lord. It was precisely because of such a rare ability that the Jiufa Zhong family had not been able to find Witch Yuan with this ability for nearly 100 years to worship the great sage, heaven's equal. It was also because the conditions for unlocking the seal were so complicated that only when the dragon snake appeared could the great sage, heaven's equal, temporarily escape and come out to slay the dragon snake. However, according to Grandpa, even if the seal is unlocked, the curse will still recover after a while and seal the great sage, heaven's equal, back to the West Heaven Palace. Hui Na tried hard to recall the information she heard from Susanoo. Such a curse that can even imprison the god of disobedience and manipulate him to a certain extent. It is said that the elders of Yushur exhausted their efforts and spent nearly a lifetime to complete it. Anyone who wants to lift this curse must follow the lifting method. Hui Na looked at Noah with admiration. As a result, the king actually violently lifted the entire curse at once. It's amazing. Hearing this, Noah couldn't help but laugh dryly. Noah didn't know that the curse that imprisoned the great sage, heaven's equal, was so complicated and powerful. Gathering the wisdom of the elders of secluded world, it took the equivalent of a lifetime to complete the great curse. No wonder it could imprison the god of disobedience and control him to a certain extent. Unfortunately, no matter how powerful the curse was, in the end, it was just a barrier and seal that formed a cage. In the face of the power that could cut the world and open the world, there was no reason why any barrier and seal could not be broken. It was precisely because the curse that imprisoned the great sage, heaven's equal, was a barrier that the noble phantasm named Good Parting Sword, EA, could cut it off. After all, Good Parting Sword, EA, was originally a noble phantasm. It's just that I didn't expect that even Tian Songyun was destroyed. Yoli looked at Hui Na, hesitated, and said softly. Hui Na, this shouldn't affect you, right? It's okay. Hui Na waved her hand casually. Although without the divine blade, I will definitely lose a part of my strength, but I can still use the invite God to descend technique and borrow Grandpa's power. Even if I can't compete with God, I won't lose to anyone else. Indeed. Even without Tian Songyun, Hui Na's invite God to descend technique could still obtain the same power as the god ancestor and mythological beast. This was the real violation of the rules of the head of the Witch Yuan. Of course, just as she said. No matter how much she violated the rules, she couldn't be compared to God and the God Slayer. At this moment, there was a knock on the door. Noah, Yoli, and Hui Na cast their gazes over at the same time. They saw Winter Horse Gontai open the door and walked in from outside the door. As soon as he came in, Winter Horse Gontai said such a sentence. King, I'm afraid you don't have to deal with the great sage, heaven's equal. Such a sentence made Noah completely stunned. Chapter 14:23. In the dark night, the soft moonlight slanted downwards, illuminating the entire bustling city. A cold wind with a slight chill blew past, causing the clear whistling sound of the wind to reverberate in the surroundings. It did not subside for a long time. On top of a tall building in such a city, a young man suddenly flew over like a bird. In the blink of an eye, he landed on the roof of the tall building. His body bent slightly, and his knees bent slightly. The force of his fall was completely neutralized, and he straightened his back. It was a young man of about 14 or 15 years old, wearing a black shirt and jeans of the same color. With light steps, the young man nimbly leaped onto the railing of the building. As if he was weightless, he stood upright on the railing, looking down and muttering. The place where the great sage appeared is probably around here, right? Taking a closer look, in the direction where the young man was looking, there was a messy area that had turned into ruins. The area around the ruins was completely cordoned off by a police cordon. Police officers and police cars were also surrounding the area, guarding the area like it was heavily guarded. That was naturally the Western Heaven Palace, which originally worshipped the great sage, heaven's equal, as the ape god. The young man looked in the direction of the Western Heaven Palace and sighed as if he found it troublesome. Although it's very easy to break in, it doesn't make any sense. Anyway, the great sage is definitely not there. Master only asked me to find the great sage. It's useless to come here. Although he said that, the young man's eyes were quite sharp as they swept across the ruins of the Western Heaven Palace. The traces of the collapse of the rubble are still very clear. Although some of it has been cleaned up, it should be a measure taken for the rescue. Looking at it this way, the rubble was created about a dozen hours ago, which is not much different from the information we received. Then, the young man seemed to have felt something. He turned his head and looked in one direction. There is a huge amount of curse power residue here. I'm afraid that the great sage should have left in this direction. It had to be said that the young man's observation skills were really outstanding. However, for magicians and conjurers who had mastered the mysteries, this level of tracking could be completed in an instant with a small magic trick or curse. They did not need to spend much effort to carefully observe the surrounding movements. Unfortunately, the young man had to go through this kind of observation to come to the same conclusion. Because, although the young man was very famous in the magic world, he was a complete layman when it came to spells. If the youth were to fight, in this world, the number of people who could claim to be able to defeat him in a one-on-one battle would not exceed 10. Of course, that was under the condition that the God Slayer and the God of Disobedience were not taken into account. However, if the young man were to do the delicate work of tracking, it would only make things more efficient. The youth himself was very clear about this. However, there was nothing the youth could do. After all, it's master's orders, the young man grumbled. Even though he knew that it would waste a lot of time for me to do it, master still completely ignored it. It would be better to say that when the young man spoke frankly about this matter, not only did the master he spoke of not pay any attention to him, he even berated him. The relationship between master and disciple is like that of a mother and son. As your guide on the path of martial arts, I am about to step into someone else's territory. As my disciple, not only did you not have any thoughts of exploring the path for your master, you even shirked away like this. How can you achieve great things in the future? Saying this, the young man's master directly sent him flying. No matter how many people there were, as long as they knew the details, they would definitely cry for the young man's grievances and feel resentful for the master's rudeness. However, to the young man, this kind of thing had long become a common occurrence. His master's rudeness was natural. This was because, no matter how rudeness he was, everyone in this world could only silently endure it. No one could resist. No one could object to his master's rudeness. This was because, even if the whole world condemned this rudeness, the young man's master could use his own strength to suppress everyone's voices. As long as his master was willing, he could completely destroy the whole world of humans by himself. As long as his master was willing, he could destroy 1 or 2 territories on the world map by himself. With such a powerful person, no matter how rudeness he was, it was imaginable. Under such circumstances, just a little bit of violence and a little bit of extreme way of teaching his disciple was already considered a blessing to the whole world. The young man grew up in such an environment. It was precisely because of this that the young man could grow into a person that the magicians and cursemoncers of the world could not underestimate at this age. Forget it, for the time being, I've arranged for people to come over and search. The young man scratched his head. I've also talked to the gang that secretly controls this country in advance. I think it's called the Official History Compilation Committee. Presumably, they won't disobey my master's orders, right? Just as these words were spoken, a voice suddenly rang out. That's not necessarily true. The sudden voice made the young man's entire body tense up in an instant, and a surge of curse power surged out of his body. At this time, the young man only had one thought in his mind. How could he not notice the presence of someone who was so close to him? The person who came was definitely not simple. With this thought in mind, the young man jumped up and jumped over the fence like a bird. He flipped in the air and landed on the rooftop of the building, facing the source of the voice. Then, the young man raised his head and looked in front of him. There, without him knowing, when 3 people appeared there. One was a young girl wearing a witch costume with a trace of determination and worry on her face. She looked like a weak princess who worried about the country and the people. Another was a young girl wearing a uniform with a graceful figure. Her beautiful black waist-length hair swayed in the wind, and her body exuded the elegant and natural temperament of Yamato Nadeshiko. The last one was a young man with black hair and black eyes, wearing an ordinary black shirt and black pants, and a pitch-black coat. The young man did not notice the 3 people in front of him until the moment the voice sounded. When the voice sounded, the young man immediately noticed the presence of the 2 young girls. However, the young man's presence was so close to the young man that the young man did not notice at all. After observing the posture of the two young girls, the young man made a judgment. The witch, who was like a weak princess, had no achievements in martial arts. It was impossible for her to hide from his senses and suddenly appear here. The young girl, who was like Yamato Nadeshiko, was very unusual. She was not weaker than him, but it was impossible for her to not be noticed by the young man when she was so close to him. Then, there was only one explanation left. The two young girls were brought here by the unfathomable young man. He did not know the origin of the other party, but it was definitely not simple. For the time being, he should test the situation first. The young man who made these judgments in a short moment had a face that was neither respectful nor arrogant. He was quite casual and neither servile nor overbearing. He cupped his fist and saluted. "I don't know how to address you." The two young girls did not speak, but glanced at the young man vaguely. Obviously, the young man was the center of the three. The young man was naturally Noah. It was Noah who took Yoli and Huina, tore open the teleportation magic scroll and instantly teleported to this building. "You are Lu Yinghua, right?" Noah looked at the young man with interest. The personal disciple of sect leader Luo Hao, the young master of the Lu family in Hong Kong, China, who is famous for his excellent lightness skill and great palm strength. "I didn't expect you to be so young." "Yes." The young man in front of him was the personal disciple of Luo Hao, the leader of the martial arts world of China, who commanded the world with the title of Wuxia King. In other words, this 14 or 15-year-old young man was a genius who was apprenticed to a god slayer. Moreover, he was the disciple of Luo Hao, who was famous for his excellent martial arts skills and was well known throughout the world. He was a senior among the god slayers, and only Warban could match him. The reason why Kanikiri said, "I'm afraid you don't have to deal with it," was because of the arrival of this personal disciple of the god slayer. "I heard that sect leader Luo Hao plans to come to Japan personally to fight the great sage, Heaven's equal." Noah looked at the young man named Lu Yinghua. This shouldn't be just a casual remark, right? Chapter 1424. Just 10 minutes ago, Gonchi Dongma brought the news of Luo Hao's plan to come to Japan and fight with the great sage to Noah. He also said that sect leader Luo Hao had ordered the people of the History Compilation Committee not to interfere. Not only that, Luo Hao had also sent his personal disciple here to search for the whereabouts of the great sage. After receiving this news, the upper echelons of the History Compilation Committee asked Gonchi Dongma to bring this news to Noah and let Noah make a decision. Lu Yinghua was right. The History Compilation Committee did not dare to disobey the orders of sect leader Luo Hao. Therefore, Lu Yinghua thought that the people of the History Compilation Committee should obediently listen to Luo Hao's orders and not interfere in this matter. However, there was an accident here. There was another king in this island. It was because of the order of this king that the History Compilation Committee began to search for the whereabouts of the great sage. Now, Luo Hao's order undoubtedly had a fierce conflict with Noah's order. As a result, the History Compilation Committee, which no one dared to offend, did not obediently stop work as Lu Yinghua expected. Instead, they asked Gonchi Dongma to report this matter to Noah and let Noah make a decision. After learning this matter, Noah was surprised. Although Noah had only met Luo Hao once, he still understood the actions of the Wuxia king. Although this Wuxia king could command the world, she followed the style of China women. She lived in Mount Lu and did not like to show her face in public. If an ordinary person saw her face and heard her voice, Luo Hao would cruelly cut off the other party's tongue and destroy the other party's ears. She was a real tyrant. Why would such a person suddenly travel to Japan for the great sage, Heaven's equal, and even order the History Compilation Committee not to interfere? With this question in mind, Noah asked Gonchi Dongma. Unfortunately, Gonchi Dongma also did not know. Therefore, Noah had the idea of finding Lu Yinghua, who had the ability to be accepted as a disciple by Luo Hao. Then, just as Noah was about to search for Lu Yinghua's whereabouts, Ganzhan Dongma received the news. Lu Yinghua arrived at the Western Heaven Palace. After all, the official history compilation committee had already placed spies around the Western Heaven Palace. Lu Yinghua ran over without any concealment. Naturally, he was discovered immediately. Therefore, Noah tore open a teleportation magic scroll on the spot, took Yoli and Hui Na, and instantly teleported to the building where Lu Yinghua was. Sect Master Luo Hao doesn't like to show himself in public, right? Noah pursed his lips. Why would you suddenly come here to fight the great sage, heaven's equal? As a disciple, I don't dare to guess Master's intentions. Lu Yinghua said with a fake smile. However, according to Master, the god of disobedience is undoubtedly a great hero of China, but he was raised by the Neon people. It is really an unforgivable crime. Knowing the existence of such a guy and leaving him alone would damage his reputation. Therefore, since a long time ago, Master has been waiting for the time to come to condemn the great sage, heaven's equal. Ha! Yoli was stunned and said with some uncertainty. Just because of this reason. Just because of this reason. Lu Yinghua shrugged, but there was no warmth in his eyes when he looked at Yoli. What? Does this sister have a problem with it? Yoli's heart tightened when she was stared at by Lu Yinghua's cold eyes. At this time, Yoli remembered the advice Ganzhan Dongma gave before leaving. If Miss Yoli and Miss Huina also plan to see Lu Yinghua, then it's best to be careful. That wuxia is said to have been disciplined very strictly by sect leader Luo Hao since he was a child. He was even disciplined to the point of violence at the slightest provocation. As a result, he developed misogyny and is particularly hostile to beautiful and capable women. It's best not to have a conflict with him, otherwise, he will never show mercy. In view of this, Yoli seemed to have succeeded in arousing Lu Yinghua's disgust. After all, Yoli's appearance was quite outstanding, wasn't it? On the contrary, after listening to Lu Yinghua's explanation, Hui Na couldn't help but smile bitterly with a dumbfounded expression. It's amazing, because it's too amazing, Hui Na doesn't know what to say. Obviously, Luo Hao's willful and unscrupulous behavior had reached the point where even Yoli, who had been cultivating in the mountains since he was a child, was speechless. Only Noah sighed as if he had a headache. I see, it's indeed what the sect leader would say. In the past, Luo Hao went directly to Italy to find trouble with Noah because of a small provocation from Athena. At that time, Noah had fully understood how serious Luo Hao's willful and unscrupulous behavior was. However, this wuxia king of China was extremely narcissistic and thought that everyone in the world was inferior to him. Even if they were both god-slayers, he treated them as juniors and did not care about them at all. He only saw Warban as his enemy. As a result, after being defeated by Noah in Italy, the wuxia king simply admitted defeat, which indeed reflected the generosity and straightforwardness of Chinese wuxia, which changed Noah's impression of him a lot. Now it seemed that even if he had no shortcomings as a wuxia king, as a king, the sect leader was a problematic child who gave people a headache. He was more troublesome than the 16 Knights of Reverse Time, the Distant Flying Bird, and Haruhito Hikari. Might as well let Luo Hao deal with the great sage, heaven's equal. That's not a bad choice. Noah's soliloquy made Lu Yinghua's heart move, and he asked Noah whether intentionally or unintentionally. Your Excellency seems to be quite familiar with my master, may I ask? Forget about asking, I'm not as ostentatious as your master, Noah said to Lu Yinghua in a bad mood. Just tell your master directly that if she wants the head of the great sage, heaven's equal, I can give it to her, but she better not cause any more trouble. Otherwise, this time, it won't be a simple fight. After saying this, Noah shook out a scroll, and a dazzling light covered the three of them, and they disappeared. Only Lu Yinghua was left, and he stared blankly at the place where Noah, Yuri, and Kata disappeared, and did not recover for a long time. In fact, Lu Yinghua was also a proud person. How could Lu Yinghua not be proud to be accepted as a direct disciple by the Wuxia king of China and have the strength to stand at the top of the human race before the age of 15? If someone else had spoken to Lu Yinghua like this, he would definitely not have let it go. However, at this time, Lu Yinghua did not even have the slightest bit of anger, and he began to ponder alone. This time, it's not going to be a simple fight. This sentence revealed a lot of information. This was because only a Godslayer could fight with a Godslayer. Among the current Godslayers, Warban was an old man, Madame Aisha was a woman, and Lu Yinghua knew the physical characteristics of Yarek, Smith, and Tony. After excluding the above 5 people, there was only one Godslayer left, right? Moreover, that person had indeed fought with Luo Hao, and had even defeated his master, who was almost invincible in Lu Yinghua's eyes. Thinking of this, Lu Yinghua couldn't help but recall the first sentence that Luo Hao had said to him a few months ago when he suddenly left Lushan Mountain and went to Italy. After that, he suddenly returned without any warning. I didn't expect that Luo Zuilian, would have a taste of defeat. Noah Dole is indeed a strong enemy. Noah Dole. Lu Yinghua's expression changed slightly. Could he be the Godslayer who defeated Master? This was the only way to connect all the clues. This is troublesome. Lu Yinghua's brows furrowed deeply. I didn't expect that Godslayer to be in this country. It seems that I'll have to take a few heavy blows from Master and ask her to come out in advance. At this time, Lu Yinghua still did not know. This decision caused Luo Hao to completely step onto a path of no return, and the trajectory of her entire life had been changed. On the other side, Yoli, who had teleported back to the hotel, spoke to Noah with some concern. Mr. Noah, are you really going to give the great sage, heavens equal to sect leader Luo Hao? If someone is in charge of solving the problem, why not? Noah sighed. Although I have an ominous premonition, that's right.